that my very honourable friend for Wigan mentioned. It hasn't been one person who's been roughed up. We're all pushed and poked and by it hasn't been one person who's been roughed up. Enthusiasts, let's call them, on the outside. All of them wishing to stop those views which they do not wish to hear from being heard. And one of the things that representative government has done, not delegate, referenda government has done, has always given us a chamber where people can listen to views, and that they're not somehow held to account, as we are, by a group outside who's actually given us instructions. We may not like it in this House. We may have misjudged our electorate. We may think they were foolish to actually give us those instructions. We asked for instructions, and they gave us instructions to leave.
Thank you. Sir Edward Lee.
Speaker, I beg to move Amendment B in my name and other honourable friends, which you have selected to be voted on tonight. It's obvious that one of the main problems with this agreement is, of course, the Northern Ireland backstop and the fact that there is no ability by ourselves to end it unilaterally, and there is no end date set on it. And therefore, my amendment addresses this problem by saying that if it becomes clear by the end of 2021 the European Union will not agree to remove the Northern Ireland backstop, the United Kingdom will treat the indefinite continuation of the backstop as a fundamental change of circumstances and will therefore abrogate those parts of the withdrawal agreement. This is a vital point, because under international law, if you sign a treaty saying that under the treaty something will be temporary and it turns out to be permanent or semi-permanent, you surely have the right to abrogate those parts of the treaty. And when people say that Amendment B is defective in law, I ask them to look at my Amendment R, which sets out international law in this regard, and it would be perfectly possible, allowable, and in accordance with precedent under international law for the government, when they sign this treaty, to issue what is called a letter of reservation, making it clear. So will the honourable lady allow me, because there's so many others? Less people get in. So I believe that what my amendment is trying to do is to achieve a compromise, to try and unite as many people as possible around a deal. I have to say that having done my level best to try and help the government to achieve this compromise, I am somewhat disappointed that the Attorney General appears to have slapped it down following my intervention on him. And therefore, I do reserve the right, if the government are not prepared to support this amendment, in fact, to vote against the main motion. Why? Because I believe that the fundamental problem with this withdrawal agreement is, and therefore I think I speak for many Conservative members of Parliament, it is the fear that the Northern Ireland backstop will become permanent. And therefore we have to find a way of solving this problem. And I have no doubt that if the main motion is lost tonight, that the government will go back to Brussels and will try and get some movement on this issue. But actually, you do not need to unpick the withdrawal agreement. You can do this unilaterally under international law. And I think it is perfectly possible, feasible, that if the government went back to Brussels, if they informed them of their right to issue a letter of reservation making clear that we cannot allow this backstop to be permanent, I don't believe that that would actually destroy the whole deal. I agree that we have to try and get a deal. You know, I want there to be a deal with the European Union. That's what I've been arguing for. I do not want to risk Brexit. And I follow the words of the Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead. I'm aware that this might be, in many respects, the best deal that we're going to get. I don't want to walk through the same lobby as members of the opposition. I don't want to please Tony Blair, who wants there to be chaos so he can argue for a second referendum. I want to bind this party together and find a compromise. And the compromise is staring us in the face. That this one last issue needs to be resolved, then we can unite, get a deal and move things forward.
Weeks. Believe this is a bad. If the deal is rejected, I believe it will send a strong message back to Brussels that we must find a better way forward and a better agreement, and that this Parliament will not be deterred from demanding a better deal. I will be voting against this deal because it is bad for my constituents in Halton and bad for the UK as a whole. I believe we've got to find a way forward. We've got to cooperate and work together in the national interest to find a solution that the people want us to have. And that means talking more to people. It means getting across the issues and the difficulties that we envisage. But we must have that cooperation in order we can move this forward. There may be a number of ways of doing that, Mr Speaker, and indicative votes has been one of the things being talked about during the debate tonight. But the fact is, we have to listen, we have to cooperate, we have to find a better way of moving this forward because it cannot continue the way it is.
Thank you very much indeed. The 3-minute limit now applies. Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to be called in this important debate. Defeat of the withdrawal agreement is a near certainty tonight, so we're being told, as a result of the entirely predictable coming together of the no-dealers with the no-Brexiteers, but also, crucially, Mr Speaker, because of the failure of the government to build a critical mass of centre-ground support for the deal. And given the overwhelming numbers, voting against this deal tonight feels almost like the easier thing to do. But what if you are someone who genuinely believes in respecting and implementing the outcome of the referendum result? But if you also believe that Brexit was always going to be a process rather than a one-off event, and if you believe that leaving the EU should be done in a way that's responsible and orderly, and that certain vital economic and constituency interests should be taken into account, and if you also believe that squaring off Brexit against the Northern Ireland peace process was always going to require incredibly sensitive handling, and if you believe that compromises were always going to be inevitable, because the theory of a perfect Brexit was always that, a theory, then what is the right approach then? Not the easy approach, what is the right approach? And I'm clear that as somebody who believes all of those things, voting for the deal tonight is the right thing to do. And we have a serious responsibility in this House today, and particularly that responsibility weighs most heavily on this side of the chamber, because it's we as the party in government who made this referendum happen. We triggered Article 50. We're responsible for the timetable. We helped shape the Prime Minister's red lines in negotiation. So it's not the Prime Minister's deal that's on the table for discussion, it's our deal. It's got all of our names already attached to it. And the question for us tonight is whether we are responsible enough to come together and pragmatically support this to provide a way forward and direction for the country, or whether we abdicate our responsibility and disown the very deal that we as a party in government helped to shape. And I say respectfully to those colleagues of mine who for a long time have fought the battle for Brexit, were there right at the very beginning. We've heard a number of good speeches from them this afternoon. The question I would put to them is Brexit always going to be some oppositional insurgency that's forever saying no to things, a vehicle for permanent discontent? Absolutely. Or can Brexit ever be seriously implemented as a programme for government? And I say, Mr. Speaker, I was serious when I promised my constituents that I would implement Brexit as a programme of government. And that's why I'm voting for the deal this evening, because I believed what I said. I took seriously the promises that I made to my constituent. It's too easy now to walk away. The responsible thing to do is back this deal tonight.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Tablev, Mr. Speaker. It's 6 long weeks since this process began on the 4th of December, and I'd just like to start with a book recommendation, Mr. Speaker. I hope you find it very good reading, in fact. Fintan O'Toole's Heroic Failure, Brexit and the Politics of Pain. It's a great read, Mr. Speaker. It tells about the psychology behind Brexit, exactly why they got themselves in this situation. The colonialism, the will we be a colony, the juxtaposition of every emotion, but it's really the madness of Brexit as well, catalogued by the Irishman Fintan O'Toole. And he starts off with a great Turkish proverb, saying an Englishman will burn his bed to catch a flea. And that's exactly what Brexit feels like. So I would appeal to you, please don't burn your beds, please revoke Article 50 for your own good. You probably won't listen, but anyway, I've said it. How did we get here? Well, the Prime Minister went and triggered Article 50 on March the 29th. She had not much of a thought on March the 29th, 2017, and then I remember I was fencing my potatoes a few weeks later, Mr. Speaker, and round came the news that she was now holding a general election. I was a bit surprised. I thought maybe the Prime Minister had a plan, but clearly from that moment on, fencing my potatoes, I knew she didn't have a plan. It was very obvious. And then, 6 months later, she went to Florence, of all places. No idea why she went to Florence, to beg the European Union for 2 more years. They gave her 21 months, and this is what she's now fighting about. Her whole strategy without any foresight whatsoever. It was only beaten by the right honourable leader of the opposition who wanted to trigger Article 50 immediately, meaning the disaster would have already happened. It goes on without any cognisance to the needs of the Falkland Islands or Gibraltar, who don't want any of this nonsense, and I know this is damaging to them. If you speak to any of their representatives, you will understand that. Now, when I spoke to the Prime Minister last week, when she eventually engaged with MPs, it was pretty clear that she was at sixes and sevens. She wanted frictionless trade, but had no idea, or seemed not to acknowledge, that she'd need to be in the customs union and the single market to achieve that. I saw today the Attorney-General being bamboozled by the idea of fish as a commodity. I don't blame the Attorney-General from being bamboozled. His own Prime Minister in July couldn't answer that point. She couldn't see the difference between fish quotas and then, once the fish were landed, as a marketable commodity. And this is very important for my constituency. In the islands of Lewis, Harris, North Hewitt, Benbecula, South Hewitt and Barra, not to forget, of course, Battersea, Eriskay, Scalpay, Bernary, Bernara and Grimsey. These are all very important matters. But the Prime Minister is not listening. She acknowledges the damage to GDP. She said so at the meeting. And yet the Prime Minister is only wanting this deal to buy herself 21 months. She is again playing the Gloria Gaynor card, kicking it all down the road and hoping she will survive. She is running out of road now, and she knows she's running out of road. But one thing I'd like to say, earlier it was all blamed on David Cameron, but of course the Liberals were the ones who started this game in the beginning, and that should be remembered. Too many in the UK have played the game of Europe. This is why we want to get out of Europe. I want to get out of the United Kingdom as Scotland. We want... Checking you're paying attention, check you're paying attention. We in Scotland will want out of the UK to stay in Europe. We see what Ireland's doing, we'll do the same.
We're all immensely grateful to the honourable gentleman. Dr. Julian Lewis.
Because Brexit should mean Brexit, and no deal is better than this bad deal, I shall vote no, no, and no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Rachel Reeves.
It's a pleasure to follow the right honourable gentleman. Look, Mr. Speaker and members of this House, this isn't about what happens this evening, because that is a foregone conclusion. This is now about how the Prime Minister responds to the defeat tonight and where she takes us and where the government takes us next. My Select Committee on Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy has taken evidence back in November and December on these issues, and I just want to give members from all sides a sense of that evidence and what businesses said to us. Paul Everett from the Aerospace, Defence and Space Business Trade Body told us that the withdrawal agreement is not as good as the deal we have today and won't ever be as good as it is today. Nestlé gave evidence to the committee, and they said that leaving the EU is like ripping all the wires out of the back of a huge mainframe, and then when you are standing there with all these wires, it will take an awful lot of time to rewire us into a different trading system. The chair of the American Pharmaceuticals Group said we are trying to rebuild what we may have taken apart. And of course there is now the news from Jaguar Land Rover, where they describe the perfect storm of which Brexit is one fierce element, resulting in 4,500 job losses. Mr. Speaker, we are in a position where the government says that the deal that they have negotiated is not as good for our economy as the one we have today. We have businesses telling us that the deal the government has negotiated is not as good as the one we have today. And yet tonight we have the situation, we're in the place where the government are asking us to vote for a deal which we know will make our constituents poorer, our economy weaker and our security arrangements less secure as well. I can't in good conscience, Mr. Speaker, vote for that deal. And I did not come to this decision lightly. My constituents voted the way the country voted. They voted to leave. But I don't think that there is a single person in my constituency who voted for the deal that we have before us this evening. And I don't think that by voting for the deal that we have before us this evening that we will heal the divisions that we have in our country. Since the referendum, nearly 1,000 young people in my constituency have turned 18. They are probably the people most affected by the decision that we are making this evening, and yet they had no say in it. I hope that in the days ahead, the Prime Minister will start to listen, as she has not listened so far, Mr. Speaker, to the voices in this House and to the people in this country. I hope that she will rule out no deal in the interests of our country and in the interests of our economy and building a better future for us all, and then allowing the people to have a say on the deal that she has negotiated.
Heidi Allen.
New High Dax.
I want to begin by addressing the issue of our divided country, something repeatedly emphasised by commentators. I disagree. They are totally united. United by a pride in their country and in a determination that their nation deserves the best. Regardless of which side of the argument we're on, it's because we all care passionately about the future of our country and our citizens. Although there is clearly disagreement, like in any family, about the path to get there, we are united in demanding nothing short of the best. I believe, therefore, that this shared determination and sense of national dignity means we will find a way to navigate these times and come out stronger on the other side. But we have to find a way of uniting this place and the people. When I decided to become an MP, it was for one reason. I wanted to play an active role in assisting and serving our country. It wasn't for the job title. It wasn't because I had a sudden urge for my friends and family to think me honourable. Indeed, they're regularly quick to dispel me of this myth. It wasn't because I wanted a job for life. It was because I wanted to play my part for as long or as short as my party and my electorate wanted me to. As a Member of Parliament, you're a custodian for a short time with a responsibility to do the singular best for your constituency and your country and nothing else.
Dollar high.
So I've approached my role by applying analysis, the consideration of facts, constant
Dollar
and
high.
changing, and by listening to and representing my constituents in South Cambridgeshire as best I can. So it angers me greatly when I hear MPs say they will reluctantly, or with a heavy heart, vote for this compromise. Not because I don't believe the Prime Minister has done her best, I have no doubt that she has. But MPs, none of us, should be voting for something that might make the economy weaker and risk jobs. How on earth can we purport to be representing this country at a national level if we are prepared to advocate that? Not good enough, I say. Absolutely not good enough. If we're doing it to protect ourselves, our own jobs, our party, or our own reputation within our party, then we should be ashamed.
Hear, hear.
And if that sense of pride and unwillingness to compromise on our nation's future were to result in me losing my position, then I am prepared for that.
Dollar high.
Because, Mr. Speaker, I will look back at my time as a Member of Parliament in this country's hour of need and say, I did my bit. Because lest we forget, we are elected to carefully consider all the options, all the risks, to read those lengthy documents and to make the tough decisions when required, and I exercise those duties with the utmost seriousness. I recognise, of course, I cannot please all the people all the time, but from the thousands of emails, letters, tweets and conversations I've had with my constituents, it appears they are content with my approach.
Will she give way?
I will.
I'm sure that many young people in her constituency who particularly want to make sure that their views and concerns about Brexit are listened to will be particularly pleased to hear her talking about how she approaches this very important long-term decision that affects them the most.
Because that is the most important point, because this is about the future, not here today and certainly not yesterday. So here we are today with a non-binding political declaration that will inevitably, and indeed already has, become a negotiating tool for other EU leaders, France for access to fish, Spain for game playing with Gibraltar. And the biggest risk for me, the possibility that our next Prime Minister may not honour the negotiating principles in that declaration. With this Prime Minister's position assured, I would perhaps have more confidence, but there is a very real danger that the government may be led by someone who wants a hard, no-deal Brexit. In that instance, the political declaration, non-legally binding, would not be worth the paper it is written on. So I ask myself if this deal will definitely improve opportunities for my constituents. Will it really safeguard jobs? Will it guarantee scientific and medical collaboration? No, no, no. Will it support our services industry, which make up 80% of our economy? No, they're not even part of the deal. So, Mr. Speaker, I have no regrets, I have no reluctance. For me, the decision is as clear as day. This is not good enough for my country. So let us harness what unites us in Great Britain and Northern Ireland, that pride and determination to demand the best for the future. Let the people be part of the serious decision, let them vote on this deal, and let's ask them, is it good enough?
David Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are coming to the end of a long process, of which today is the final day of the debate. Like the Prime Minister, I voted Remain in the referendum. Like the Prime Minister, I voted to trigger Article 50 because my constituents voted to leave in that referendum. And like the Prime Minister, I want to see a deal which meets the aspirations of our business and our community of the referendum, but also to bring our country together. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that having reviewed this deal is not it. I speak as a former Justice and Security Minister in this House when we had Labour governments. I cannot see any proposals in this withdrawal agreement that gives any comfort on the issues of Europol, on Eurojust, on the European arrest warrant, on cooperation on SIS2, sharing information on criminals across Europe. No contact at all on those issues for the future. I can see no deal on trade in this deal before us today, which will secure the future of employment across the United Kingdom or in my constituency. I had the very great privilege of serving as a Northern Ireland Minister, and I can see no justification whatsoever for treating Northern Ireland as a different part of the United Kingdom, given the history of the difficulties in Northern Ireland with the Irish Republic, and colleagues here today share that view. And I understand why that can also not be a deal. The Treasury's own figures show that the Prime Minister's deal will reduce the economy by at least 2.5%, and therefore I cannot support it. But I can't also, Mr. Speaker, support no deal. In my constituency, I have Toyota, who are going to cost £10 million per day for the cost of a no-deal Brexit. I have Airbus nearby employing thousands of people who depend on free and frictionless trade that no deal will destroy. I have farmers in my constituency who need to export their goods, which no deal will destroy. I have Vauxhalls in my constituency who even the Prime Minister's 2-year period will mean that decisions about the next generation of vehicles in Vauxhalls at Ellesmere Port nearby will be taken with the shadow of no frictionless trade being held over them. So I can't support no deal. But I say to the Prime Minister, echoing what my honourable friend for Leeds Central said, there is scope for a deal. If she looks again at her red lines, if she looks again at what I stood on in my election 18 months ago now, for access to a single market, for strong rights at work, for strong environmental activity. There is scope for a deal. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 48 hours. There may be a vote of confidence, it may be won, it may be lost. But whenever that dust settles, Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister and this government, or another Prime Minister and the same government, will need to contact the opposition to find a way through this. It can be done, it should be done, and I want to make sure that I defend the interests of my constituency. We will not be poorer because of a decision that we can work our way through.
Thank you.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In June 2016, after 40 years, a generation, my constituents, along with the rest of the country, were given a voice on the European question. My constituency overwhelmingly voted to leave the European Union. And tonight I will honour their views, honour their voice, and to paraphrase my right honourable friend, the member for Loughborough, I will represent them, despite the fact that I voted to remain. And setting aside the details of the withdrawal agreement for just a moment, a legally binding agreement, I want to address conversations I've held with my constituents, rather than with distinguished right honourable and honourable colleagues and friends in this House. And my constituents' vote to leave did not suggest any fear of foreigners or concerns about wage deflation or immigration. But it did reflect an understanding of that universal and overarching principle and principles of freedom, sovereignty and independence, so ably put by my right honourable friend, the member for Esher and Walton, earlier on. And my constituent support for Brexit is not inconsistent, Mr. Speaker, with a fond affection for Europe, shared European values, a belief in the rule of law, high environmental and employment standards, freedom of speech, and, dare I say it, democracy. Their decision is also not inconsistent with recognising the huge contribution of EU citizens to the NHS, to UK farming, particularly in Shropshire, to car, food and defence manufacturing. In all these sectors, EU citizens continue to make, and I hope will continue to make, a highly valued contribution to our economy and our society. Brexit was not a vote against Europe, but it was a vote for Britain, a free and independent Britain. And I will not be supporting the withdrawal agreement this evening because it puts the United Kingdom in a weaker position than our current status as a full member of the European Union. It makes us, as we've heard, rule takers but not rule makers. It does not set Britain free to implement bilateral trade deals with other countries around the world. So, Mr. Speaker, much has been said over many weeks in this place about those who voted to leave the European Union. And I want to say it is a higher principle rather than some of the low commentary that we've heard in this place from both sides of the House. It is a higher principle that my constituents have voted to leave the European Union on, and that is the freedom of this country, the independence of this country, and the sovereignty of this country.
Thank you. Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all commence by saying that this withdrawal deal, as we read it at the moment, keeps us as an annex of the EU, not in a Brexit from it. What I would like to say, Mr. Speaker, is this, that in the past 2 years there has been a narrative that has developed both within the Chamber and across the nation, and the narrative is a completely and utterly false premise. that
In
narrative
about 8
is
minutes or so,
that the EU,
at the
as
top
it
of
is
the hour,
constituted,
we will have the
is
short-term
a
energy
place
outlook
of
released.
safety, a place
I repeat
of
that, that's the
security,
short-term energy
and a
outlook
place of
released at the
certainty.
top of the hour.
And to leave that is like a ship in a storm. And many people have portrayed the United Kingdom, as we leave the EU, as being that vessel that is facing an unfortunate and untimely departure from a port or a harbour. And that completely and utterly negates all that has been going on within the EU over the course of the past couple of years. And what do we see is the seedbed of that in the EU, whether it is national populism in Italy, in Germany, in Hungary, in Sweden, France, Poland. It is a sense and a feeling of frustration, of isolation, of a sense of political establishments not listening, not paying heed to what the people say and what the people want. And that is what I detect in this country, Mr. Speaker. A sense of frustration, a sense of alienation, allowing an expansionist empire to keep us embodied as a side annex to that EU is not going to be a good future. It's not going to be a way to show our children and our grandchildren that this is the future. This is a future that we can look forward to and aspire to. What we need, Mr. Speaker, is after today, assuming this vote is carried in the way most people think it will be, the Prime Minister to go back to Brussels and to say this is not going to win. We need to have an agreement that I can get past the House of Commons, and above and beyond that, our people in the United Kingdom will be demanding, not just aspiring to, but demanding that above and beyond a good trade deal, above and beyond that, they aspire something greater, something beyond that, and that is a sense, an ultimate sense of freedom beyond the EU.
Damien Collins.
Against the withdrawal agreement, which I will not be voting for this evening. I believe the deal is not what people voted for in the referendum, and I believe it will leave us worse off, and in terms of having less control in our relationship with the EU than we have today. I believe there is a lack of faith, a lack of good faith, and that is why so many members across the House have spoken against the deal. When the negotiations started, we were told there wouldn't be an agreement on anything until there was an agreement on everything. We were told that the future arrangement and the arrangement on trade would be part of the negotiations and the deal. We were then told that an agreement on the amount of money we would need to pay during the period of transition would unlock the process of discussing the future trade agreement. We are now told that we must pay the money as part of the transition with no obligation or requirement on the part of the EU that we should agree a trade deal. We will not get any of that money back if the negotiations fail. But my concern is not just that. My concern is the immediate future, what we are voting for to happen now. And to use the analogy of the Attorney-General of his key into the airlock room, which really is the backstop. He is right, we can turn the key, we can go into the backstop. But what became clear through his remarks, which he didn't necessarily express when he used this analogy, is that when we go into that room, our key is taken off us. We neither have a key to go back to where we were, nor one to go through the door into the next space. We are trapped in the backstop. And the EU have got lots of good reasons to want to keep us there. They have us by default committed to largely the rules of the customs union. They have us shadowing the rules of the European single market with no say in how they're made. They can sit back and wait for something more favourable. And maybe they would like something more punitive too, but it leaves them holding all of the cards in any negotiation on our future relationship. That is not a situation this country should put itself in. That is not the basis to negotiate a good deal for the future, which gives us a good trading relationship and protects the interests of this country as well. We should not give that away. We are being asked to do something now which we were promised would never happen. We're being given a fait accompli. We're being told you have to accept this deal, otherwise there's no Brexit or there's no deal at all. I do not believe that. The German Foreign Minister has said today that if the deal is voted down, that talks can resume, and they must do. And it would, of course, be a betrayal of the people of Northern Ireland to lock them into a different economic and political status without ever having asked them whether that's what they would accept and that's what they wanted. We have to reject this deal today. We have to go back to the negotiating table. We have to make sure that whatever option we choose gives us the freedom to choose our future direction, does not lock us into arrangements we have no power to get out of. That would be a betrayal of the interests of this country and something that I could not accept.
Stephen Morgan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
New high NASDAQ. New high spoon. New high NASDAQ. New high DAX. New high NASDAQ.
It is our duty to defend and deliver the will of the people. From Portsmouth to Pickering, Penzance to Peterborough, it is essential the referendum result is respected. However, it is clear that no one in the referendum voted for this half-baked deal put forward by the Prime Minister. This deal is a galaxy of uncertainty.
New high DAX.
The Treasury Select Committee explaining that the government analysis did not assess the short-term impact of leaving the EU. When this fact was put to the Chancellor, he agreed. If the Chancellor himself agrees that the deal is uncertain, how can the Prime Minister expect MPs to gamble with the lives of their constituents? So what does this government's deal mean for Portsmouth? For QA Hospital, it would mean staff shortages induced by the Prime Minister's continuation of the hostile environment, a reduction in shared research and international cooperation, and it threatens prosperity needed to fund a much-loved local NHS. It rules out a permanent customs union with a British say, which is vital to support Portsmouth's businesses, local jobs and the manufacturing supply chains they depend on. It also threatens Portsmouth's international port, which generates £7 million directly to council coffers to fund local services in an area where a third of children live in poverty and a city forgotten for too long by government. Will this continue under Mrs May's deal? Whilst I've asked, unanswered questions remain. Mr Speaker, it is inevitable that there are multifaceted challenges posed by exiting the EU. In my constituency, we've seen a 12% swing towards Remain from a Leave vote. Uncertainty perpetuated by this government's deal has left many others with unanswered questions. That's why 70% of people in Portsmouth South want some kind of final say when it comes to Brexit. The people need clarity. The people need control. The people need a final say. A no-deal scenario, Mr Speaker, would see those most vulnerable bearing the brunt of decisions made by the few. If no-deal Brexit was imposed, there would be a 29% increase in average food import costs, affecting people on the lowest incomes disproportionately. This Palace in Westminster is the birthplace of democracy, where so many decisions have been made to shape not only our great country, but our world. One thing we can all agree on today is that Brexit is the most important decision this country has taken since the Second World War. My grandparents grew up in Portsmouth. My parents grew up in Portsmouth. I grew up in Portsmouth. The importance of this deal is not just for us here today, but for generations that will inherit consequences of our actions. It is a privilege to stand here and represent a constituency that contributed so greatly to our nation's success. I cannot jeopardise Portsmouth's future by voting for a deal that will make my home city poorer.
Thank you. Robert Halfon.
Thank you. I voted Remain in 2016 because I felt it was better for Britain to belong to an alliance of democracies. However, in my heart, I felt that the EU was both undemocratic and bureaucratic. I understood why people wanted to take back control and the pressures that ordinary people face in their daily lives, particularly with the cost of living. And it was clear to me after the referendum that the public had had enough. My own constituency of Harlow voted 68% to leave, and I made it very clear to the residents of Harlow that I would do all I can to ensure that the wishes for Brexit was followed through. And it's why I'm strongly opposed to a second referendum, which would divide the country once again and disenfranchise 17 million people who voted to leave and potentially cause political unrest and extremism, as many who voted to leave would feel that their wishes had been ignored. I do not for a moment believe that people were not informed or were too stupid. Far from it. In fact, it was us, politicians, who were the foolish ones for not listening to the anguish of many working class communities over many years, struggling with the cost of living and the pressure on our public services, doing the right thing, working hard, yet facing obstacle in their daily lives. So my view was that any withdrawal agreement needs to ensure that it follows the wishes of the British people. And the problem for me with the Prime Minister's deal is this. How do I go back to my constituency of Harlow and say we don't have money for our libraries, our hospital and our community groups, but we can give 39 billion of hard-earned taxpayers' money to the EU without even getting a trade deal at the end of it? When the House of Lords said there was no obligation to pay the 39 billion, should the government at least not have published a cost-benefit analysis of the money we would have to give to the EU under the withdrawal agreement? And we're tied to the EU structures via the transition and the backstop, a spaghetti junction of EU bureaucracy that potentially could be infinite. I have never rebelled against the current Prime Minister in this Parliament, but I will be voting against the deal tonight for those reasons, because we create two different regimes for Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, which has the potential to weaken our union. We're in this spaghetti junction without a vote or a veto. And that's why I'm also trying to offer alternatives with a colleague on the opposite side of the House, the Right Honourable Lady from Manchester, a common market 2.0. A common market would actually take back control by removing us from the CFP, from the Communities Agriculture policy, take back control of our fish and our farms, take us out of the European Court of Justice, offer us a break on freedom of movement, but safeguard jobs, safeguard our communities, safeguard business and our economy.
Shabana Mahmood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said this morning in setting up today's vote that we, that is to say Parliament, mustn't, and I quote, let the country down. But the real tragedy is, Mr. Speaker, that ever since the Prime Minister assumed her position and began the process of implementing Brexit, her way of handling this process has done exactly that. It has let the country down, because a vote won by 52% to 48% required the language of compromise from the government and the Prime Minister herself at the outset, and not the language of red lines. We are, Mr. Speaker, a divided nation. Not surprising if we ask our citizens to answer a binary question in a highly polarising and toxic debate. And no attempt has been made to reach out, no genuine attempt has been made to reach out to the 48%, to bring people together and to tell those that found themselves in a minority by a very small margin on that day of the referendum that this is still their country too, or by stating unequivocally that all those citizens who have been exercising their British rights and their British freedoms to dissent and to hold an unpopular or a minority position, still arguing for Remain, is not the act of a saboteur or a traitor, but it is in fact as British as it gets. Instead, we have allowed the toxic language and rhetoric to take hold, poisoning not just our politics but our wider society. And just as there has been no reaching out to the rest of the country by this government, Mr. Speaker, there has been no reaching out to the rest of this House either. The Attorney General said it feels like a very long time ago now at the outset of his speech that we have reached this point today reluctantly. That is not true, Mr. Speaker. All of these choices that have been made along the way, choices willingly and indeed willfully made by the Prime Minister, they have led us not reluctantly to this place that we are in today, but inexorably to the place that we find ourselves in today. And it is unforgivable that we have lost a whole month, a simple running down of the clock, because the Prime Minister was afraid of what will happen inevitably this evening anyway. That is to say, she will lose a vote. I cannot support the withdrawal agreement or the political declaration for many of the reasons that members have already set out, not least because it ignores 80% of our economy and the services sector on which so many thousands of jobs depend. I will, though, Mr. Speaker, support all and any measures that allow Parliament now to do what the Executive has so demonstrably failed to do, and that is to commence the search for a consensus. I believe that we should move to some indicative votes to find what will command a majority in this House. We must take all and any steps to rule out a no-deal Brexit. The real tragedy, Mr. Speaker, is that Brexit on any terms will not solve many of the reasons why Brexit took place in the first place, but at the very least we as a House must make the best of it and find a consensus way forward.
Thank you. Richard Bacon.
Speaker, a constituent of mine who voted leave recently said, "I am sick and tired of being told I didn't know what I was voting for. I knew exactly what I was voting for. Recently on Bloomberg, Mervyn King, the former governor of the Bank of England, said Britain is not facing an economic crisis, it is confronting a deep political crisis. Parliament has brought this on the country. It voted overwhelmingly to hold a referendum. The people were told that they would decide. Indeed, they were. On the 10th of November, David Cameron said at Chatham House, ultimately, it will be the judgment of the British people in a referendum. You will have to judge what is best. Your decision. Nobody else's, not politicians, not parliaments, not lobby groups, not mine, just you. You, the British people, will decide. It will be your decision whether to remain in the EU on the basis of the reforms we secure, I emphasise, Mr. Speaker, or whether we leave. In February 2016, David Cameron at the EU Council then secured his reforms. There was the so-called red card, where enough national parliaments combining together might be able to block a Commission proposal. There were temporary limits on access to in-work benefits for newly arriving EU workers. There were some limits on child benefit and a vague commitment to reduce regulation. That was the deal. It wasn't very impressive, but that was the deal. And that was what people voted on, whether to stay in the EU on that basis or whether to leave. And they voted to leave. The question in the Scottish referendum was, should Scotland be an independent country? If the vote had gone the other way and unionists had then said, well, you know, it depends what one means by an independent country, or did the people really know what they were voting for? This will make Scotland poorer. I can't possibly support it. There would justifiably have been outrage. Yet that is exactly what is happening here, where the question was straightforward. Should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? That was the question, and the people voted leave. The problem is that some people have no interest in respecting the result of the referendum, and they think they know better. The present situation recalls Bertolt Brecht's poem, The Solution. After the uprising of the 17th of June, the Secretary of the Writers' Union had leaflets distributed in the Stalinallee, stating that the people had forfeited the confidence of the government and could win it back only by redoubled efforts. And as Brecht put it so devastatingly in the final stanza, would it not be easier in that case for the government to dissolve the people and elect another? I will be voting against this withdrawal agreement because it will not deliver Brexit. It gives the EU the right to impose law on us indefinitely and a veto over whether that would ever change, while breaking up the country by requiring Northern Ireland to treat GB as a third country and making us pay £39 billion, even though without a withdrawal agreement we're not legally obliged to pay a penny, and while the former Chief of the Defence Staff and the Chief of SIS both say the withdrawal agreement will fundamentally affect our national security. People voted for change. What we want is a self-governing country where we rule ourselves. We don't need this deal. We just need to leave.
Thank you. Hannah Bardell.
Mr. Speaker, at the heart of this debate are opportunities and rights. The opportunities and rights of the next generation of young people across the UK. And the 16 and 17-year-olds who didn't get to vote in this referendum because the government didn't think that they were responsible. Now, it's hard to believe, I'm sure, but it's some 13 years since I graduated from university. And when I was at the University of Stirling, I studied alongside Erasmus students. I studied alongside Erasmus students who came from across the EU, who enriched our life, who enriched our country, who enriched our education system. And I had colleagues and friends who went across the EU and had exactly the same experience. That we are going to deny those opportunities to the next generation of young people is a human tragedy. And that we are treating the EU nationals across the UK with such contempt is also a human tragedy. And when the Scottish Government and the First Minister of Scotland put the hand of friendship out in the first few days after the referendum, unfortunately the Labour Party were calling for Article 50 to be triggered. And when we put the hand of friendship out, again, in recent months, saying that we would pay the ridiculous fees the EU nationals were being asked to pay, this government has tried to block it. And the Scottish Alliance for Children's Rights and Concerns set up a committee, and they highlighted some of the concerns like EU funding, opportunities to work, to study and travel abroad. And so much of what we hold dear about the EU has been about our rights. And as a gay woman, I know that this Parliament and the Scottish Parliament has done a huge amount for LGBT people. But as Mark Townsend wrote in The Guardian last year, The Westminster Parliament has played its part in making amends, but without the carrot and stick of European institutions, would we enjoy the level of protections from discrimination that we now possess? And I think that is a reasonable point to make when you look at this government's track record on trade union rights. What happens? What happens when we don't have those protections anymore? Where does that leave us? And in 2017, John Walker at the UK Supreme Court had his pension rights instated so that his husband would have the same pension rights. It was an 11-year battle against this government. And we must not forget the big boys that did it and ran away. Those who got us into this mess, who are now nowhere to be seen. Yeah. And we also must remember, Mr. Speaker, that my constituents and the people of Scotland voted to remain within the EU. And when the circumstances change and politics moves forward, as it inevitably does, people should be allowed another choice.
Baron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to move my Amendment F in my name and that of other right honourable and honourable members. Very briefly, the amendment would give the UK government the unilateral right to exit the backstop at a time of its choosing. It's very straightforward. The UK could not find itself indefinitely suspended in a backstop. If this amendment is passed, it would allow the UK to choose the time, if it did enter the backstop, a time to exit, and it would not have to seek EU approval to do so. Mr. Speaker, I rise with some sadness. I think the negotiations to date have been approached as a problem to be solved rather than an opportunity to be seized. I, for one, do not like the transition period. But in any negotiations, particularly after 40 to 45 years of integration, there has to be an element of compromise, and I'm willing to accept that. But the backstop, I would suggest, is the real problem for many on these benches.
Spot on.
The government cannot answer this very simple question at the moment, and it directly addresses the indefinite nature of the backstop, and that is, without any legal certainty with regards our ability to unilaterally exit the backstop, what certainty is there then that the EU could not play a very long game, drag out the negotiations, and by further extending the transition period, which it could do, we could be having this discussion in 3, 4, 5 years to come. That is not honouring the result of the referendum. We need to leave the EU. We need to be quite definite about this. And the backstop is not the answer because it is indefinite. We could be there for a very long time.
This gives us the key.
I'm sorry, others need to come in. I do apologise. But the backstop, by passing Amendment F, it also encourages both parties to negotiate constructively when it comes to the transition period and the trade deal. Because if the EU knows that it can't trap us in the backstop, then it is more likely to constructively negotiate a trade deal for the benefit of both parties, I would suggest. The Prime Minister, could then go back to the EU. The EU has a long track record of 11th hour deals. I think it would go a long way, the amendment, to help unite our party, which is terribly, terribly important. So, Mr. Speaker, if the amendment is not passed, unfortunately, I will have to reluctantly vote against the withdrawal agreement.
Richard Burden.
Deputy Speaker, can I first declare an interest? I chair the All-Party Motor Group, which receives support from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, the Motorsport Industry Association and the RAC Foundation. And yesterday, I attended the first meeting of the development partnership that has been established by the Business Secretary in response to the announcement that Jaguar Land Rover are cutting 4,500 jobs this year. Now, this isn't a company in crisis. Indeed, in addition to the job loss announcement, the company were able to tell us yesterday about the really exciting forward investment plans they have going forward.
But it is still a time of great uncertainty for the employees involved, and there is a big role for that development partnership in standing by them. I also don't claim that the job losses at Jaguar Land Rover are only to do with Brexit. The downturn in the Chinese market is an important part of the picture, as indeed has been the depression of sales of cleaner diesel engines. And shortage of time means I can't go into that today. But Brexit is part of that picture too. And yesterday's meeting reinforced to me my belief that whatever else happens beyond all other things, the important thing now is to rule out crashing out of the EU without a deal. It's not something that can be mitigated. You know, whether it's a ferry company with no ships or converting an airport runway into a lorry park, it's no answer for motor manufacturers or to their companies in the supply chain to have somewhere to park their trucks when they cannot get those trucks to or from the Channel ports to deliver the parts needed every day to build 6,600 cars and 9,000 engines here in the UK. They need to be able to get the 1,100 trucks that carry these components across the Channel every day to keep their plants going, not just only on time, but in the right order to keep production lines going. And it's the same for the £3.4 billion worth of components going the other way, coming from suppliers in the UK into the European Union to build vehicles over there. And the only way to keep that production going is not to make forlorn efforts to try to mitigate the chaos, it's to stop the chaos happening in the first place. Investment decisions are now on hold. If we want to guarantee those and secure those, we have got, above everything else, to rule out no deal. And to do that, we have to decide what we do after the Prime Minister's deal is defeated tonight, as it surely will be. We've got to buy ourselves some time to do that, because any other option will not be able to be completed by the 29th of March. So if that means extending Article 50, that's what we should do. We need to prevent a no-deal Brexit by default. That is now the overriding priority.
Jones.
This House gave the people a vote in 2016. The people had their say, and the majority voted to leave. I did not vote to leave, but the majority did, and that must be respected. Now, there are lots of views as to how we should leave the EU. I take the view that I want to stick as much as I can to our 2017 manifesto that I was last elected on, and that did form the basis of what we have in front of us today. Is the deal perfect? No. Does it get us out of the EU on the 29th of March?
In about 10 minutes or so.
And it gives us the basis for having a situation where we do take back control of our laws, our money, our borders, our fishing, our agriculture policy, and the basis of a trade deal. I accept totally the challenges that honourable members across this House have raised in relation to the backstop. And I've had to take a view and balance that view against the wider imperative. I must admit I am drawn to the honourable gentleman for Basildon's amendment, and I was certainly drawn as well to my honourable friend for South West Wiltshire's amendment. And I do hope that if this vote fails tonight, that we may look at the situation in the context of those types of proposal and whether or not we can make further agreements with the EU. Because I fear that if we do not work along those lines, we have two distinct groups in this Parliament, one that want a no-deal Brexit and one that don't want Brexit at all. And I do fear that both of those groups are going to want to race to the 29th of March. Both of them think they are going to win, but only one group can win. I think if we looked at it in terms of race, the favourite is probably no deal, because we have the legislation already in place to work towards that. But I would not rule out, following the events that we had last week, that the people who want to stop us leaving the EU will do everything within their power between now and the 29th of March to stop us leaving. So, Mr. Speaker, I will back the deal, but I just want to say to the House and to my constituents, and I'm interested in supporting this deal because I think it's good for jobs, I think it's good for manufacturing industry in my area, but I will not renege on the referendum. I won't support anything that extends Article 50, a second referendum, or doing anything that will stop Brexit. We must leave on the 29th of March. I'm committed to that, and I hope the House will do that if we do not ratify this deal in the coming weeks.
And Liz Kendall.
Much of this debate has been dominated by questions about the Northern Irish backstop. Whilst these are vital, we must not lose sight of the fundamental question we should be asking ourselves tonight. Is this agreement right for our country? Will it make us prosperous and stronger and help us deal with the challenges of the future? Mr. Speaker, it will not. The agreement doesn't secure our future trading relationship with the EU, as people were promised in 2016. We haven't even begun those negotiations, and despite what many businesses hope, they face huge uncertainty for years to come. But the truth is, there is no free trade agreement that will deliver the same benefits as our current relationship with the EU. There will inevitably be barriers to trade, which will inevitably make us poorer than we would otherwise have been. At the same time, during the transition, we'll be giving up our say over many of the rules that govern our lives, a say which, whatever the Brexiteers tell you, Britain has always exercised to powerful effect within the EU. How is that taking back control? Neither does the agreement provide answers to the reasons why people voted to leave in the first place. As my right honourable friend, the member for Wolverhampton South East, has said, in many parts of the country, the Brexit vote was driven by a deep sense of loss of the industrial jobs and the pride and purpose they brought, and a rejection of what has come in its place. I know from my own constituency that many people are angry, and above all, they want change. But the EU and immigration have not caused the very real problems people face, and Brexit will not solve them. Britain is actually better able to cope with the problems created by globalisation when we're part of a strong group of like-minded countries. And most of the powers to transform people's lives lie within our hands. We should be offering people the chance to succeed, not something or someone to blame. And we should be making the changes to our economy and public services so people in every part of the country can thrive in an inevitably uncertain world, rather than pretending we can somehow stop the clock and make the rest of the world go away. Mr. Speaker, I'll be voting against this agreement tonight, but time is running out. We cannot wait any longer to provide the leadership we need to get us out of this hole. I will support moves to try and build consensus across this House and to rule out the threat of no deal and the chaos this would bring. But I believe the best way to break the logjam is to put the question of where we go next back to a public vote. Because what's on offer is so very different from what was on offer in 2016. Because it's right in principle to say this is the reality of Brexit. Do you want to go ahead or stick with the deal we have? There is no jobs first or sensible Brexit, and we, particularly on these benches, should have the courage to tell it like it is.
The 2-minute limit now applies. Andrew Selous.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People had wanted to have their say on the European issue for very many years. When we gave them the referendum on the alternative vote, the main question in my constituency is why aren't you giving us a vote on our membership of the European Union? So 17.4 million people voted to leave, 58% of my constituents, more people voted for this than have voted for anything, and importantly 403 constituencies in this House voted to leave, and those people were promised that their vote would be honoured. It was the people's decision. It wouldn't be overturned by politicians or by this Parliament. And I don't think it would be right to say to those people that we're now going to have a second vote when we haven't delivered on what they voted for the first time. Now, I think what has become clear in the last month or so is that there is a majority in this House against no deal. So if there is a majority against no deal, and if we then vote down this deal, the alternatives that are left, Norway or some version of it, I think are so far from what people voted for that we will have broken faith with the British people. So what I say to my friends across the House, pragmatic Brexiteers and democratic Remainers alike, We must stop an alliance of people who want to stop Brexit, an alliance of people who want an even stronger Brexit, actually denying what the people voted for. We know that business does not want a second referendum. That would lead to even more uncertainty. And I heard from trades unionists today, trades unionists who wanted to leave, saying it will unleash an unprecedented level of disillusionment in British politics, which will be unparalleled in our history if we don't deliver Brexit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This isn't a deal, to be honest. The withdrawal agreement means we pay £39 billion for the right to obey EU rules without the right to sit at the table when they're being drawn up. And the political declaration is so woolly, it could mean whatever you want it to mean. Or for that matter, and more importantly, whatever the next President of the European Council and the European Commission wants it to mean. We have no idea whether we shall have open trade with our closest neighbours. We have no idea whether we shall continue to share information about dangerous international criminals, or take part in Europol, or be able to extradite criminals to face justice across European Union borders. So it's bad for British jobs, and it puts our national security at risk. I'm angry, Mr. Speaker, that we've wasted so much money on Brexit, money that could have been spent in my constituency on decent services. But what pains me most of all is that we British, who have always been proud to welcome strangers from other countries, we who have travelled across Europe to build great British companies, we who followed Churchill's injunction to build a Europe of peaceful cooperation, we who prided ourselves on the rule of law and our robust parliamentary system, have utterly squandered 2 years on a massive distraction from the real subjects that matter: inequality, poverty wages, the state of our public services and low productivity. And in the process we have become an international laughingstock. Anxious, angry, uncertain, divided, death threats to our constituency offices. I have not heard a single member say that this deal is better for Britain than our present deal. Not even the Prime Minister. So how on earth could we possibly vote for it? Consensus, frankly, is a delusion in here. Party politics has failed. The Prime Minister must build a new coalition, and the people must have the final say.
Thank you very much. Craig Tracy.
Again, it's no secret that I voted to leave the EU, as did a majority, 67% of my constituency, and nearly 17.5 million people across the UK. And I know the reasons for leaving were varying across the country, but I've spoken to thousands of my own constituents, both before, during and after the referendum, and they were very clear in what they voted for. They wanted to see an end to free movement and control of our borders. They wanted sovereignty for our parliament, and they wanted the ability to trade freely around the world. And those are sentiments that I very much share. I was keen to see an agreement delivered that I could support, and critically, the one on offer doesn't meet 2 of those criteria set out by my constituents: returning of our sovereignty and the ability to trade freely. And my personal concerns on the deal are similar to many in this House, mainly around the backstop and the future legal agreement. As it stands, the deal on the table potentially gives away our sovereignty and £39 billion worth of our money, with absolutely nothing guaranteed in return. As I've said, getting agreement is the most favourable option, but not at all costs. And I believe with this deal that we have, we're giving too much away. But I don't believe it's too late to change course. We can secure amendments which deliver wholly on the referendum result. And those changes need to include getting rid of the Northern Ireland backstop and having guarantees on our future relationship, which are things are likely to command a majority in this House. And importantly, deliver on the democratic will of the British people. And it's important that that is delivered, because people are so frustrated at the games of some politicians who are seeking to frustrate the result that was given. So I implore the PM to go back to the EU. I know they've said the deal was final, but they've moved on other things, and we've seen that they are able to change the goalposts when they suit, and come back and give a deal that we can get behind.
And before I start my speech, I would like to take the opportunity to pay tribute to the Plaid Cymru Assembly member, Steffan Lewis, who very sadly passed away on Friday. At just 54, he still had so much to contribute. He was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the party's best minds. His inspirational vision for lifting Wales' status in the world reached across the political divides. His influence and legacy will endure beyond our political lifetimes, and we miss you, Stephen. The Prime Minister and her inner circle have reached endgame, run out of road in the project of misinformation, arm-twisting and semantic chicanery, of my way or no way, of partnership proffered as the gateway to the future of her precious union. She says she's reaching out across the party boundaries, but it's just too little, too late. It is, sadly, that the spirit of acknowledging another vision of the respect implicit in the sweet moderation of compromise. Such politics are beyond her. Her gaze has a way of swivelling back to the Brexiteers fossilised in the strata of her own party. The rest of us, and especially the voices of Wales, have been invisible and unheeded. Here is a concept of parliamentary democracy in the age of devolution reduced to the absurd. Mr. Speaker, she claims no solutions other than hers have been proffered or are indeed possible. This tired political gambit now looks desperate. It has neither credibility nor veracity. Mr. Speaker, when we plead with her to give the people the final say, as many of us had, on the biggest question of our generation, the Prime Minister commands us to honour the result of the Brexit referendum. Yet, in 1997, she voted against legislation to establish the National Assembly for Wales, and in 2005 stood on a manifesto calling for another referendum with the option to overturn the result. History has shown that she's very much prepared to go back to the people of Wales. And so I would ask her today, why not Europe?
Thank you very much indeed. Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard time and time again today in this chamber that the people should have a final say. Well, people did have a final say, and it was in 2016. Just because people in this chamber can't quite come to terms with the fact that the public weren't sufficiently scared witless that they voted to remain in the European Union is no excuse for us not to listen to what they had to say. 57% of the Ribble Valley voted to leave. 75% of Conservative seats voted to leave. 61% of Labour seats voted to leave. And at the last election, Labour Party and the Conservative Party both stood on manifestos that said we would deliver leaving. So therefore, that's what we have to do. I know democracy can be difficult at times, but that is no reason at all to deny the democracy that this Parliament gave to the people, the sovereignty going back from this House to the people, and they had their final say. I've got problems with the deal as it currently stands, particularly on the backstop. Basically, the European Union have an opportunity to actually chain us to the European Union, but of course they haven't got the handcuffs. So what we are doing is deciding to offer them the handcuffs and the key. And I think that would be hugely dangerous indeed. I look forward for the opportunities when we do leave to do trade deals throughout the whole of the world, including the European Union. We buy £341 billion worth of goods from them. They buy £95 billion less from us. It's in both our interests for us to come to some form of trade deal. We've got a 20-month transition period when that can start. But the important thing is that we leave on the 29th of March. It's almost like Christmas Day, I've got to tell you. It's the 25th of December. That's what people look forward to. And if we deny people the opportunity to leave on the 29th of March, they'll never forgive us.
To Rosanna Allen-Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, working in my emergency department as a doctor, I looked around the waiting room and saw it all on display. People's pain, their hopes, their fears, their courage. Whether you are a mother relying on food banks to feed your malnourished children, or you are a father waiting too long for a cancer chemotherapy operation, this deal does nothing to improve lives. Just as the NHS is tasked with healing and prevention, so we are too in this House. We have politicians and commentators who continue to fuel the rhetoric and fan the flames of hatred. Parliament, once a symbol of hard-won rights through democratic discourse, is seeing voices forcibly suppressed by fear and intimidation. People questioning the very character of our culture in order to tear apart the fabric of our society. This deal, the language around this deal, and the empty threats used to force us into supporting it are doing nothing to rebuild Britain. We can start the journey to rebuild Britain by looking at the rising use of food banks, the numbers of operations cancelled, the number of police on our streets. Now, more than ever in this place, we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves and ask ourselves, who are we?
On the Brexit front from Ireland,
British people are tired of rhetoric, political games and uncertainty. And in the absence of a government which leads, this Tory government, it is imperative that this House sets an agenda which looks to repair the deep wounds that now exist within our society. We need to dig deep over the coming days and question not only what sort of leaders we want to be, but what we are going to do and how we are going to force our country to heal once all is said and done.
Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amazed to make it into the top 50. I'm going to try and make three points. The first is to agree with the Honourable Gentleman for Halton and my Honourable friend for South Norfolk about the attitude towards the Leave vote. It wasn't some cry of anguish or an expression of concern. It was a decision. We gave the people the decision and they took it. The second point I want to make is about the preparation for no deal, and I'm obliged to the anonymous civil servant who concluded his piece in the Telegraph on the 28th of December as follows. An enormous effort by thousands of hard-working civil servants has been made to ensure that if we leave the EU without a deal, crashing out over a cliff edge is simply not going to be an option. And it is purely a political decision not to make this clear to the public and nervous backbench MPs. But if the government was frank with Parliament and the country, and we have authorised £4.2 billion of expenditure on this, by the way, what justification would be left for its disastrous withdrawal agreement? What would Remainers do without a Project Fear? They would need to think up convincing positive arguments for staying in the EU, something that has so far proved beyond them. And the final point I want to make is about defence and intelligence. Now, I know that my right honourable and gallant friend, the member for Mid Sussex, has taken an extremely dim view of a noble friend, Lord Guthrie and Sir Richard Dearlove in the letter they have written to Conservative Association chairman, and he's perhaps quite right to have the expression of an outraged Bateman cartoon for their behaviour in that way. However, there was a real concern that even my right honourable friend was not able to address when he didn't have time-limited remarks last Friday about the substance of what they are warning about in the detail of all the issues over CSDP and the rest that is contained within the European acquis, and we would do well to pay attention.
Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I first spoke in the meaningful vote debate, I spoke of the shambles of this government's handling of Brexit, of my alarm at the historic mess of their making, of my anger at the contempt with which they have treated this House and the people we represent. I spoke of my constituents' outrage at the turmoil the government is inflicting on the economy and of the threat to workers' rights, environmental standards that this Brexit deal represents. I spoke of the danger the government's approach has towards EU citizens' rights that must be guaranteed, no ifs and no buts. Now, 5 weeks later, what has changed? The Prime Minister said she was going back to the EU to get reassurances to appease her disgruntled backbenchers, but she has returned with nothing. Nothing has changed, as her saying goes. We are now being asked to accept the same botched deal as we were then, a deal that fails to protect jobs, rights or people's livelihoods, a deal that the government's own analysis shows would reduce GDP by 3.9% and make every region worse off, a deal that provides no guarantees on maintaining key rights such as the rights of disabled people, which are protected and found under the EU Charter for Fundamental Rights. All that has changed since the Prime Minister poured the vote is that we now just have 73 days left until the 29th of March, and it is clear the Prime Minister is trying to run down the clock and hold this country to ransom. She is using the prospect of a catastrophic no deal to threaten this House into accepting her botched deal. This is unacceptable, and I know the people of Battersea and the people across this country are disgusted at this attempted blackmail. That is why I will be voting against no deal, and I encourage all members across the House to do the same.
Jeffrey Clifton Brown.
Speaker, I intend to change my mind. I am a Brexiteer by DNA through and through. We gave the British people the opportunity to vote in a referendum on the 23rd of June last in 2016. I intend to vote to honour that in full. But in return, I expect my colleagues on the front bench to pay very close attention to my concerns about this particular deal. I actually happen to believe we have a very bright future outside the EU. And the current position is, legal position is, we are leaving without a deal unless this House overturns that legislation. Therefore, the ultimate irony is all of those people who are voting tonight against the deal are more likely to end up with a no deal. I do not want to see that happen. I want us to leave with an agreed deal that is acceptable to the British people. I have two main reservations. One is on the Northern Ireland backstop. I think we do need to get legal clarification as a withdrawal from that backstop in a specified time, preferably no longer than 2 years. The second major objection I have to the backstop is that it ties us in to a customs union with the EU. I want to see us get out of that customs union so that we can have an independent trade policy, because I think the best future we have for this country is outside the EU, trading with growing nations around the world. We cannot do that while we're stuck in the backstop. I therefore intend to vote for this deal tonight. I intend to sort this matter out for my constituents, as I promised. I intend to give businesses certainty, but in return, I want the government to come back with a better deal.
Tim Farron.
On the day of the 2016 referendum result, I called for a vote on the final deal. This didn't instantly meet with wild approval. My motives may have been misunderstood because, you see, I am used to losing elections. I have never called for one of those elections to be rerun. I am a very good loser. I have had bags of practice. You see, there is much talk about the legitimacy of our democracy and trust in Parliament being tarnished if we don't enact Brexit on the 29th of March. But what does it do for trust in politics if we force the people to accept a deal that most of them clearly do not want? Let's not fool ourselves. Nobody here speaks for the majority. There is no majority of the people anymore. The Brexiteers in this place are voting both ways today. The Brexiteers out on the streets peacefully protesting are calling for votes in both directions today. I had the joy of stopping for a few minutes. Good quality banter with many of them last week. We should do more of that, by the way. But some were asking me to vote for the deal. Most were asking me to vote against. So the minority of my constituents who favour Brexit, most are asking me to vote against the deal. Some for. The 17.4 million figure is now divided into at least two opposing camps. Referendums are an awful means of sorting out any issue. They are divisive, they are dangerous, unless, of course, it's an issue that nobody cares about, like the alternative vote. But we have reached the place where the only democratic, legitimate, peaceful and consensual way through this appalling mess is to give the people the final say. Let our future not be one that anyone can claim was foisted on Britain and not by politicians, by this Prime Minister's Whitehall, Brussels stitch-up. Let our future be one that is owned by the British people, that was endorsed by the British people, that has a legitimacy that brings the unity and the healing that only a final say can bring.
Thank you. Ranald J. Wardener.
Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman who talks about winners and losers. But this is not about winners and losers, it's about what's right. And the Prime Minister has repeatedly said that no deal is better than a bad deal. I believe a deal is possible, but this is not it. This is a bad deal. Now, I know that some, both in this place and beyond, have expressed their wish to agree it anyway. People who continued to campaign for Remain after the referendum in order to guarantee that we avoid no deal, or people that believed in Leave, but out of party loyalty or fear of Brexit, seek to support the deal in front of us. I respect that others will vote as they see fit. It's important for every member to act in good conscience. But it is for that very reason that I cannot support this deal. Trust in politics remains at an all-time low. To pretend that this deal delivers on the referendum only continues to foster the distrust we've seen out there. Let's be honest with people. This deal doesn't deliver on the referendum. It retains the worst parts of the European Union without the real benefits of Brexit. So I happen to agree with the vast majority of my constituents who've contacted me, both Leave and Remain voters, who've urged me to vote against this deal. Nonetheless, let me be clear. I do want to secure a deal with the European Union. I continue to believe that we can still agree one. And I do believe that the negotiation now, sadly, does potentially need to continue, even after a no-deal departure from the European Union on the 29th of March. We must be bolder if we wish to strike the best deal for Britain, whether before D-Day or beyond.
Mr. Speaker, this should be a historic day for the future of our country and Parliament. This was once the chamber of Winston Churchill and Clement Attlee. Instead, it is a day of high farce and self-delusion. The government pressing ahead with the deal they've known for weeks is dead. The leadership of my former party offering the illusion of an election when they have no chance of winning a no-confidence vote. The no-deal camp, who have no regard for the impact this would have on our constituents. In the last chance saloon, it's incumbent on us to seek a pragmatic compromise which can secure a majority in this House and in all political parties. I don't care whether this is presented by the government or facilitated by this House. Putting Brexit back to the people would be an abdication of our responsibility. It has nothing to do with breaking a logjam and everything to do with seeking to reverse the result of the first referendum. It will further divide our country when we should be leading and healing. I cannot support this worst of all worst deals, and I genuinely believe that the only option which can secure now a majority in this House is a common market too. At its core, a very simple idea that we can be out of the political structures of the EU, but maintain our economic and security partnership. This will require a radically reworked political declaration based on EEA and EFTA. After tonight, this should form the basis of the Prime Minister's new negotiating position. Or alternatively, the House will have to take control and seek a pragmatic compromise. Common market too, or something else. Our duty, Mr. Speaker, is to lead and to heal this divided nation.
Pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman, and it's an honour to be taking part in the debate at a crossroads in our history. In 2016, the British people voted to leave the European Union, and the government and this Parliament needs to respect those wishes. I accept, Mr. Speaker, that there are passionate views on both sides, and speaking for myself, I've always treated those with differing views with respect. But it is wrong for some to suggest that most people didn't know what they were voting for. Many of those that espouse those views really think that the people of this country should not have been given that decision in the first place. It is my belief that those are calling for a second referendum are seeking to damage our democracy, as no decision by the British people would mean anything anymore, because once a decision was reached, those that were not happy would try to undo it, and this might go on again and again and again and again. Now, division is healthy in a democracy and in our political process, but a second referendum, I believe, would take our country to breaking point and undermine the dignity in our democracy. The withdrawal agreement does allow for some control to be taken back, and Mr. Speaker, I do respect that the endeavours of the Prime Minister. She has made a major commitment to this. Her perseverance is commendable and her diligence unquestionable. There is only one point I wish to make on this withdrawal agreement, and that is on the Northern Ireland backstop. The inclusion of the backstop is perhaps the most potent aspect of this agreement, given the fact it poses a real threat to the integrity of our United Kingdom. While some have tried to allay the fears with optimism, more concerning are those that have displayed a parochial indifference that fails to recognise our role as United Kingdom Members of Parliament, acting in the interests of the whole United Kingdom. The British people did not vote to have the foundations of our nation to be undermined in any way. And Mr. Speaker,
I'll never forget Warren, who I first met as an apprentice, moving into the house, a little Victorian terrace house with his partner, saying that as a consequence of having got a job in the Jaguar plant, good and well-paid job, he was moving into the house of his dreams with the woman of his dreams. The plant and the success of Jaguar Land Rover has transformed the lives of thousands, including in my constituency, Erdington, rich in talent but one of the poorest in the country. The company producing 108,000 cars a year at the heart of the Midlands economy. Now, absolutely key is the relationship with Europe. Half their market is in Europe. If they had to fall back on World Trade Organization terms, it would put up prices of cars they sell between £3,000 and £5,000. The millions of parts every day, the thousands of lorries, the frictionless trade, that relationship which has been absolutely key to the success of the automotive industry in our country. And Ralph Smith, the inspiring chief executive, together with the whole industry, have warned of the consequences of what happens if we don't get it right. What was the response of some of the honourable members opposite? Honourable member for Uxbridge, F business. Honourable member for Harwich and North Essex, he's making it up. Honourable member for Uxbridge again, not sure that Ralph knows more about the automotive industry than I do. And the honourable member for Chingford saying not one job will be lost as a consequence of Brexit. What planet do they live on? Yeah. And that's why two things are key. This is not a good deal, but first we have to get to a good deal that works for Britain. We have to get up to that, honouring the obligation that we gave to the people of Britain at the time of the referendum. But secondly, in the meantime, there can be no question of a no-deal Brexit. In the words of Ralph Smith, no to no deal, because to go over the cliff on the 29th of March without a deal would be utterly catastrophic for our country.
Drew Murison.
Percent of my constituents voted to leave, and so did I. It may be unfashionable, but I will be supporting the government tonight, because after the sophistry, chicanery and obfuscation of last week, I genuinely feel that we may not have Brexit at all. The Attorney General is absolutely right to say that there is risk in the backstop. We need to de-risk the backstop. My amendment would have done that had it been selected, as would the amendment tabled in the name of my right honourable friend, the member for East Devon. The amendments B and F had pretty much the same effect, since they would introduce a time limit. I commend them to the government. Mr. Speaker, in 2006, people weren't being thick or stupid or ignorant. They weren't overwrought. They weren't racist. They weren't prejudiced. They were not needing to be given a second chance, and they were not anguished, in the words of the right honourable gentleman, the member for Leeds Central. They just wanted to leave. They are sovereign. We serve them. Let's get on with it.
Adrian Bailey.
Speaker, the Attorney General opened this debate by saying this debate was ineluctable. The fact is, it wasn't. It only became ineluctable when the Prime Minister, failing to recognise the need to build a consensus across the country and in Parliament, started to adopt language which was inflammatory about the EU, red lines which ruled out much needed conditions for any settlement that would help our manufacturing industry and indeed the situation with the Irish border, and also opposed any parliamentary involvement in the process. By doing so, she alienated a body of people in this House and across the country which she would need to build the necessary consensus to get a deal that would be acceptable both to Parliament and the country. Mr. Speaker, I represent a constituency which voted 70% Brexit. I'm a Remainer. I don't pretend it's a comfortable position to be. I voted to trigger Article 50 because I felt I had to honour the referendum result. And I've been lobbied heavily to say that as a representative, I should do what my constituency wanted. The problem is, I'm also being lobbied on people who want a better health service, access to the doctor. They're worried about their jobs with Jaguar Land Rover. They're worried about policing and the rise of crime in the locality. And I know that all these, which I am equally obliged to deliver, will be jeopardised by voting for this particular settlement, because it does not give us what we have now. What we need is for this to be defeated, the Prime Minister to extend Article 50, and for a consensus to be reached in the ensuing months.
I would have liked to have been able to support the government's motion this evening. I voted Remain, and certainly I have deep concerns about this whole process. But I have looked at the whole issue of the backstop, and I have been consistent in this respect, which is why an amendment was tabled in my name, which was not selected, and indeed a similar, rather better amendment, building on mine, from my right honourable friend, the member for Westbury, Chairman of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee, but that wasn't selected either. And I just cannot reconcile myself as an MP in this House that I can vote this evening to effectively commit this country into a backstop from which it has no unilateral right to withdraw. So it is with a heavy heart that I shall not be supporting the government this evening, because I believe there is still a deal, a fair deal, to be done with the European Union. There is a good deal which respects all our peoples and all our industries and all our businesses. There is a deal to be done, but, Mr. Speaker, this is not that deal.
Neil Gray.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to set out why I'm to vote against the Prime Minister's deal. I start from the position of respecting the result of the EU referendum in Scotland. The people of Scotland resoundingly rejected the idea of Brexit, and according to the polls, continue to reject Brexit and the Prime Minister's deal in even greater numbers. And no wonder. It has all been about self-interest for this Prime Minister and the Tory party. She triggered Article 50 without a plan. She held a snap general election for her own self-interest, but lost her majority. She ignored the Scottish Government's offer of a compromise which would have carried the House. She set herself red lines aimed at satisfying her extreme Brexiteer backbenchers, but boxed her into an impossible corner and left her facing a no-vote confidence vote anyway. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail, and that's why I think the biggest mistake was triggering Article 50 when she hadn't done her homework. She tipped the hourglass with no plan, no idea, no backing, and today, 2 years on, as the sands start to run out, nothing has changed. She has no credible plan, no idea, and no backing. And now she is trying to make it a Hobson's choice in order to deflect from the politically inconvenient choices that do remain open to us. She should request an extension to Article 50 to allow the people to have their say. But the Tory leadership aren't the only ones to have acted purely out of self-interest in this process. The leader of the opposition wants to renegotiate Brexit, but won't say what he would renegotiate. He wants a general election, but doesn't have a plan to achieve one, and won't say what his Brexit policy is going to be. He can't decide whether to back another EU referendum, and doesn't know if he would campaign for Leave or Remain. In conclusion, it could have been so different. On Radio Scotland this morning, the honourable member for East Renfrewshire rightly encouraged the Prime Minister to ignore the extreme Brexiteers. Sadly, his very sensible advice was 2 years too late. The sands of time have moved on. Instead, the warnings of Brexit leading to a greater chance of independence are becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I voted to leave, my constituents voted to leave, the country voted to leave, and leave we must. But I say to my fellow Brexiteers in this House that we must accept that we are a majority in the country, but we are not a majority in Parliament. If I give an analogy, we are 10 players on a pitch playing a team of 11. The odds are now even further stacked against us since the referee has demonstrated he is prepared to change the rules. This deal is not perfect, and I am concerned particularly about the indefinite nature of the backstop. But the risk of not supporting this deal, as demonstrated last week, is that members of this House will seek to water down even this Brexit or to stop it altogether. I will support this deal, Because once the withdrawal agreement is signed, the door to Remain will shut firmly, and we can all come back together and focus on delivering the best future for the UK outside of the EU.
I haven't changed any rules of the debate. What I have done is I've chaired the debate from start to finish, facilitating every honourable and right honourable member of every conceivable hue of opinion to have every opportunity to put his or her view. It's a point so blindingly obvious and so transparently fair that all reasonable people would, I think, accept it. Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency of Bristol South voted 53 to 47% to Remain, and the closeness of that vote is something I have sought to represent and understand since. But the Prime Minister can't say that they will be better off. The best I've been told, even in private by Brexiteers, that there will be a period of uncertainty for some 15 or so years, and then we will perhaps know we've made the right decision. That is a monumental leap into the unknown that I will not make for my family, and I will not make it for my constituency. And it is a shocking dereliction of responsibility by the Prime Minister that she asks us to do so. I want to talk briefly about our precious union. Mr. Speaker, the word precious means of great value, not to be wasted or treated carelessly. But this government has treated this union carelessly. Not only have the last 2.5 years done nothing to heal the 48-52 division, but they have done nothing to bring together the views and interests of people across this union, and only let out the destructive nationalist and separatist genies out of the bottle and caused great uncertainty across our land. The Prime Minister has not even done what her predecessor said and involved the devolved executives, the government and the regional powerhouses properly in her negotiations. There seems to be a glimmer of hope from last week. The latest Brexit Secretary started talking about targeting regional assemblies and the governments. That's not the sort of tone or approach we need. That is more of the same. If the government is to salvage anything from the last 2.5 years, then they must recognise the mutual interests of all our people across the constituent parts of the United Kingdom, and they need to start treating the English cities and regions with a modicum of respect. They have to start healing this country.
Leo Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to support this deal, and I do so as someone who voted to leave the European Union, like 58% of my constituents, because, Mr. Speaker, in my judgment, this deal is the only sane and sensible path to an orderly Brexit that will allow us, Mr. Speaker, to reset our relations with the European Union, not as an unwilling member of the Federal Club, but as a close friend in ally. And when we do this reset, Mr. Speaker, we must bear in mind the positive vision laid out by Sir Winston Churchill in Zurich in 1946, when he implored a Europe that had been ravaged by war to unite for the sake of peace. And he famously exclaimed, Mr. Speaker, that we should let Europe arise. The role of Great Britain, he said, Mr. Speaker, should be as a friend and sponsor of the new Europe, and we must be its champion and champion its rights to live and to shine. That positive vision, Mr. Speaker, still applies today, and that should guide our relations with our European friends in the future. And more than that, Mr. Speaker, it should guide our relations with countries beyond Europe, and it should guide our role on the world stage. More than ever before, in the new era, Mr. Speaker, we must be more confident, more positive, more international and more global than ever before. And we should be confident in the ability of British commerce, British culture, British diplomacy and British law to have a far-reaching, highly positive impact around the world. But to do that, Mr. Speaker, we must make the first step of achieving the prize of Brexit. And the first step, Mr. Speaker, is passing this withdrawal agreement, and I will be supporting this tonight.
Thank you. Joanna Cherry.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister wondered what the history books will make of all of this. I'd like to venture a few suggestions. She will be remembered as the Prime Minister who has presided over the biggest failure of government and leadership in the United Kingdom in modern times.
Hear, hear.
Instead of having the moral courage to face up to the fact that the EU referendum was won on the back of lies and fraud, she has instead set out to achieve the unachievable, a deal better than the deal we currently enjoy. In doing so, she has ignored the weight of expert evidence. She has ignored the economic assessments of her own government and advisers. and she has presided over a regime so incompetent and questionable that no-deal government contracts are being awarded without competitive tendering to dubious entities without any legal justification whatsoever. And she spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on taxpayers' money trying to prevent us from knowing the answer to the question of whether Article 50 could be unilaterally revoked. She barely has the confidence of her own party, and they only put up with her because none of them have the gumption to step up to the plate to sort out this mess.
Correct.
It's likely that she soon won't have the confidence of this House, and in Scotland she's never had our confidence and she never will. She should not take the Scots for fools. The majority of us voted to remain, and the majority of Scots now realise that they were lied to during the 2014 independence referendum. Those lies, Mr. Speaker, were that Scotland was an equal partner and that the only way to guarantee staying in the EU was to vote to stay in the UK. The results of referendums won on the back of lies cannot stand, and that's why I'm voting down this deal. I want a second EU referendum, and there should also be a second Scottish independence referendum.
Mike Wood!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I plan to support Amendment Q this evening because the safeguards sought on the backstop are necessary and supported by a substantial number of members. However, I shall now be voting for the similar amendment tabled by my honourable friend for Basildon and Billericay. I arrived in Westminster yesterday expecting to resign today as a PPS to vote against the motion. Whilst there is much to support in the withdrawal agreement and future partnership, under a prolonged backstop, we couldn't take back the control that I campaigned for in the referendum and the 71% of my constituents in Dudley South voted for. That hasn't changed. It still worries me. However, I've concluded that there is now a much greater threat to Brexit that my constituents voted for. Events over the past week show that there are some in this House who will stop at little to frustrate Brexit, leaving no convention and no established practice of this House safe. I cannot risk those who have never accepted the referendum result stealing the Brexit that my constituents and voters around the country voted for in record numbers. My constituents aren't stupid. They weren't misled. They knew that they were voting to take back control over our laws, our borders, our trade and our money. They knew it wouldn't be plain sailing, but they knew it was a battle worth fighting. They expect us to deliver. I don't expect this motion to pass tonight, and so the government must listen to genuine concerns across this House, and the deal that it comes back to this House with must genuinely take back the control that people voted for in 2016. I will support that work starting tonight in this evening's vote. It's the last chance and our best chance we have to deliver on the promise of Brexit, and our democracy desperately needs it to succeed.
Thank you. Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is the last day of my 20s, and as I reflect back on the last decade, I have to wonder, how did I end up here? And how did the country end up here in this almighty fancle, frankly? And it seems to me that the root cause of a lot of our problems in this country is one of economic alienation. Economic alienation caused by a crisis of neoliberalism, one that has failed the poorest people in our society. And we try to identify the root cause of a lot of the problems that erupted in the vote of so many people in this country to leave the European Union, and also looking back as a veteran of 2 referendum campaigns of so many people voting to leave the United Kingdom as well. It can only be, in my opinion, put down to the fact that the established structures in this country have failed to deliver prosperity and security for so many people in our country. When I look at my own constituency, where only 51% of people participated in the EU referendum, it seems to me that many people have disengaged with the political process entirely. And that is something that we have to take cognizance of in this House if we're really going to repair the trust in our political system between those who vote for us as representatives in this place and the body politic at large in this country, who in many cases have disengaged with our political process. Simply by talking about a deal, talking about no deal, isn't going to heal that rift in our democracy. We have to have a much greater and more thoughtful approach to how we heal this division in our society and how we do it. And I don't think that the Prime Minister, who has just joined us, is equipped to do that, and she's failed miserably in her efforts and her partisan approach in delivering this deal. We must adapt and deliver for the young people of this country, including myself, who have to face the future of the consequences of this action of this House and this Prime Minister. She must rise to the occasion, and so far she has failed miserably to do so.
Kirsten Hare.
The British people directed us to take the United Kingdom out of the European Union, and it is our duty to put that to effect. We must not tell them to vote again until they give a different answer, or deliver a non-Brexit that keeps in the EU in all but name. There are clear opportunities, and we must embrace them. No parliamentarian is 100% comfortable with what's in front of us. That was inevitable for a whole host of reasons, including no clear direction for the outcome of a Leave vote. But too often self-interest takes over the decision-making process, with the SNP determined to force a no-deal situation in the hope that that would accelerate their case for independence. Myself and my fellow Scottish Conservative MPs and I have always been robust when it comes to our support for the fishing industry. No one can say that that industry has not been pragmatic when it comes to our departure from the EU. Whatever happens today, let me be clear that I will not accept any extension of the transition period beyond December 2020 because we must embrace the sea of opportunity that Brexit presents to them. I also had concerns around the Northern Irish backstop, and it's with deep disappointment that we have not really reached a technological solution to date. I would have also felt much more comfortable with an end date on the establishment of a future economic partnership. But, Mr Speaker, this decision for me is about my businesses, my constituents, those that I represent. A deal is a negotiation with a large dose of pragmatism, and having spoken to many of my largest employers, my constituents knocked on their doors and stood in the supermarket, what they want is uncertainty removed. Mr Speaker, the withdrawal agreement may not be perfect, but it does deliver on the decision. Does it deliver on the decision taken by the people of our United Kingdom in 2016? Yes. Does it return full control of our borders, as so many people wished? Yes. Does it provide long-term stability for businesses, our farmers and our fishermen? Yes. And of all the options on the table, this agreement is the one with the most in the national interest. Mr Speaker, I believe that it is, and that's why I'll be supporting the deal tonight.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the member for Angus for a thoughtful speech, albeit one whose thrust I must say I cannot agree with. Over 2,000 of my constituents in Oxford East have contacted me about this deal, and only a handful say they support it. And I agree with them. I can't support it for 4 reasons. First of all, it gives inadequate protection for our EU citizens, who are our neighbours, our friends and our workmates. I see the Prime Minister looking at me, but she will know that I have had a repeated communication with her and the Secretary of State over many, many weeks trying to get confirmation over the exact criteria for settled status. We still don't have that clarity that we need, and that's now coupled with an arbitrary salary level for those coming to our country for the EU, which will starve our hospitals and our universities and many other employers of the staff we desperately need. I can't support it because of that. Secondly, I can't support it because of inadequate plans in that deal for research cooperation into the future, so essential for the 2 universities and my constituency. Third, I can't support it because of insufficient certainty on customs. Huge firms, very important manufacturers like BMW Cowley in my constituency, they don't just need certainty for 2 years, they need it for 20, and they certainly won't get it from this deal. And finally, there are no legally binding guarantees in this deal to stop a race to the bottom on environmental standards or working rights. This deal has got to be voted down, and after such a failure of leadership, this government must go. If it won't, then all options should be on the table, including a 3rd public vote, to find a way forward for our country. But whatever the process, all of us parliamentarians here need to remember we're the ones who have power. We have power, not those vulnerable people affected by the politics of hate out in our country. We have that responsibility, and we must always reject that hate. The onus is on us. Thank you.
There's a peculiar irony, Mr Speaker, isn't there, to the fact that today marks the anniversary in 1535 of Henry VIII styling himself Supreme Head of the English Church. 500 years on, Here we are arguing over the same questions of who rules, on what authority.
Stop the clock. Order. Order. Very unseemly atmosphere. The honourable gentleman must and will be heard. Alex Burkhardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 500 years on, we find ourselves still arguing about our relationship with Europe and who rules. I have little confidence that 500 years from now we will have resolved these questions. Tonight, and in the weeks to come, the House has three choices it can make. There can be a deal, there can be no deal, or we can stay in the European Union. If it is not this deal, then it must be another deal, and by all the rumours going round, that deal will be worse than the one on the table. It will keep us more closely aligned to the EU and give us less say. In fact, it will be worse than staying in the EU. Those people who in the House who want to stay in the EU hide behind the idea of a second referendum. Well, those honourable members who think the first referendum was divisive, goodness me, they haven't seen anything yet. It is time, if those members in the House who want us to stay in the EU believe it, they should call on this House to have a vote to revoke Article 50. But they won't do that. So the deal before us is what we have. And this is a deal which, treated right and taken in the right direction, will give us control of our borders, our laws, our waters, and our trading opportunities. We have had time enough to go over these issues. It is time now for the House to make a decision. I will vote for the deal for tonight, and let's move on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't come into Parliament to spend my time working on the future of the European Union. It's not what my constituents, when they elected me first in 2010, intended me to spend my time on either. They wanted me to concentrate on their living standards, their security, the future for their children and grandchildren, and a better planet for the future of our world. But actually, all of these things are encompassed in the decision we make tonight about whether or not we accept the deal that is before us, and about our commitment to our ongoing relationship with our European Union neighbours. And I will not vote for a deal that will make my constituents poorer, that will make them less secure, that will mean that we have less influence in decisions that are taken that will affect them, and that will reduce our standing, our highly respected and highly regarded standing in the world. I am distressed, as all honourable members are, at the divisions that this Brexit story has revealed, opened up in our country. But our duty now is to concentrate on healing them. And I do not believe it will ever be possible to do that if we deliberately make our country poorer and more unstable and less influential than it would otherwise have been. We need to concentrate on building a positive, prosperous, powerful future for this nation. Voting to leave the EU and voting for the Prime Minister's way of leaving tonight will not enable us to do so.
That woman!
Mr. Speaker, mine is the constituency that voted more than any other to leave the European Union in 2016. If we do not give back control of our laws, borders and money, it will be hard to say that this country is a democracy. The people in 2016 heard all the apocalyptic predictions that we now hear about WTO, and they made a choice. And in part, the country did that because Parliament had, rightly or wrongly, come to be seen as out of touch with the people on a host of issues. If we don't deliver what the people voted for, we will prove them right, and we will damage a democracy further in which people already lack faith. So how do we get there? It is clear that this House does not want to back a no-deal departure. It has already been clear that people on both sides of this House will vote to stop it. So I say to those of my constituents who have called me a traitor and worse that when I vote with the Prime Minister tonight, I do so because I am committed to Brexit, and voting against this deal puts winds in the sails of those who seek to stop it. Those people have had too much success already. Voting against this deal will not bring about a harder Brexit. It will bolster this House's dangerous attempts to undermine it. Those who say no deal is in law and will happen, I say to them this House will rewrite that law. I am voting tonight for the only way out of this conundrum, a necessary gateway, however painful it might be. There is a risk that we get stuck in the backstop, but it is now smaller than the risk of not leaving at all. We in Parliament are better than letting the people down. We deserve to get on with it, to deliver this Brexit, and we should, like it or not in many cases, support this deal tonight.
I am going to be incredibly parochial. In the general election of 2017, my personal manifesto to the voters of North Dorset said, and I quote, "I am working for a Brexit right for North Dorset that will support business, protect jobs and workers' rights, promote local farming, safeguard the environment and give opportunities for our young." Having reviewed the deal, I am confident that it meets those commitments and the referendum decision to leave. We live, as we know, in a representative democracy where the voters of North Dorset send me to Westminster to exercise my judgment and support the policies of the Conservative government. I do not, and none of us do, possess the judgment of Solomon. All I can try and do is to assure them that I am trying to do my best for them and for our country. And I am conscious that in so doing I will not please everyone, but I do not think that is the purpose of politics. I'm a Democrat. I voted Remain and my side lost. The referendum was not, as we know, our finest hour. The majority of the House has made clear that it would support the decision and Parliament would deliver it. I maintain that view. A second referendum is fool's gold. Our country's use of referenda is on constitutional issues, and Brexit is now an issue of domestic policy. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has worked, if I may say so, her fingers to the bone to get this deal right. It has my full and unequivocal support. To deliver Brexit, to maintain and build the faith in our democracy, this House should stop the posturing and support my right honourable friend in the lobby tonight.
Peter Bottomley!
The UK is to leave the EU. That decision was taken 2 years ago. The question is whether we crash out or support the withdrawal agreement, be followed by the period of transition and the future arrangements on trade and relationships. Assuming we're not trying to reverse the referendum, and there isn't a majority, I think, either in the country or in the House for that, the majority of us support the Prime Minister's deal. The majority of Conservative supporters support that. I suspect the majority of Labour supporters support that. And other parties, given a choice, including Northern Ireland, would as well. Our responsibility is to find where there's an overlap between what's possible and what's right. I believe that the negotiated agreement on withdrawal is that position. For the opposition, to be reasonably polite, they seem to resemble members of the Scarabaei family who are upside down, pushing in the wrong direction, don't quite know where they're going. If the choice for the country is between chaos and compromise, I think this agreement is the right way of being sensible, and I back the plan in the national interest.
Thank you. Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has been a vitally important debate for the future of our country and our future relationship with the European Union, following the decision of the people in the 2016 referendum. The debate today is the culmination of one of the most chaotic and extraordinary parliamentary processes I've ever experienced in my 35 years as a member of this House. Parliament has held the government in contempt for the first time ever for failing to publish their legal advice. Then, for the first time in a generation or more, on the 10th of December, a government failed to move its own business in the House. The government has been defeated on a vote in its own finance bill for the first time since the 1970s. The Prime Minister opened the debate on her deal more than 1 month ago, a debate that was due to end on the 11th of December, but she pulled it in a panic. As she herself conceded, it would have been rejected by a significant margin. She has run down the clock in a cynical attempt to strong-arm members into backing her deal. Despite her promises, she's failed to negotiate any changes to her deal with Europe. No wonder the Prime Minister has suddenly discovered the importance of trade unions. She voted to clip their wings in the 2016 Trade Union Act, and she's utterly failed to convince them she has anything to offer Britain's workforce. And this, Mr. Speaker, is the heart of the matter. The Prime Minister has treated Brexit as a matter for the Conservative Party rather than the good of the country. But she's failed to win over even her own party. Many Conservative members who voted Remain are opposed to this deal, as are dozens of Conservative members who voted Leave. After losing her majority in the 2017 general election, the Prime Minister could have engaged with members across this House. She could have listened to the voices of trade unions. And if she had been listening, both businesses and trade unions would have told her they wanted a comprehensive and permanent customs union to secure jobs and trade. The decision to rule out a new customs union with a British say and the lack of certainty in the deal risks business investment being deferred on an even greater scale, threatening jobs and threatening living standards. Or even worse, it risks many companies relocating abroad, taking jobs and investment with them. Mr. Speaker, many workers know exactly this situation because they are facing this reality now. Their jobs are at risk, and they know their jobs are at risk. Both the First Ministers of Wales and Scotland have also made clear to the Prime Minister their support for a customs union to protect jobs and the economy. This deal fails to provide any certainty about future trade. It fails to guarantee our participation in European agencies and initiatives. Losing this cooperation undermines our security, denies our citizens opportunity and damages our industries. Mr. Speaker, the withdrawal agreement is, in short, a reckless leap in the dark. It takes this country no closer to understanding our post-Brexit future, and neither does the future partnership document. Under this deal, in December 2020, we will be faced with a choice: either pay more and extend the transition period, or lock us into the backstop. At that point, the UK would be over a barrel. We would have left the EU, have lost the UK rebate and be forced to pay whatever was demanded. Alternatively, the backstop would come into force, an arrangement with which there is no time limit or endpoint. It locks Britain into a deal from which it cannot leave without the agreement of the EU. And as my friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, has pointed out on so many occasions, this is unprecedented in British history. The last 2 years gives us no confidence that this government can do a deal in under 2 years. So at some point before December 2020, the focus would then inevitably shift from negotiations on the future relationship to negotiations on an extension to the transition period, including negotiations on what further payments we should make to the European Union. The vague partnership document says, and I quote, "It can lead to a spectrum of different outcomes as well as checks and controls." That doesn't show to me any clarity whatsoever in that document. And there is not even any mention of the famed frictionless trade that was promised in the Chequers proposals. The former Brexit Secretary, that's one of the former Brexit Secretaries, promised a detailed, precise and substantive document. The government spectacularly failed to deliver it. So, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm this, that Labour will vote against this deal tonight. And, Mr. Speaker, Labour will vote against it because it's a bad deal for this country. And as we have heard over the past week, members in all parties, including many in the Conservative Party, will join us in rejecting this botched and damaging deal. And I welcome the fact there is a clear majority to reject any no-deal outcome. The amendment to the Finance Bill last week demonstrated the will of the House on rejecting the danger, and it is a danger, of a no-deal outcome that would cause such chaos to so many people across this country. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not enough for the House to vote against the deal before us and against no deal. We also have to be for something. So, Mr. Speaker, in the coming days, it is vital that this House has the opportunity to debate and vote on the way forward, to consider all the options available. The overwhelming majority of the House voted to respect the result of the referendum and therefore voted to trigger Article 50. So I say this to our negotiating partners in the European Union. If Parliament votes down this deal, then reopening negotiations should not and cannot be ruled out. We understand why, after 2 frustrating years of negotiations, this I'm saying to the European Union, you would want this resolved. But this Parliament, our Parliament here, has only one duty: to represent the interests of the people of this country. And the deal negotiated by the government does not meet the needs of the people of this country. The people of Britain, including many European Union nationals who have made their lives here, these are people who have contributed to our country, have contributed to our economy and to our public services, including our National Health Service. And those people are now anxious and have no faith in this government to manage the process of settled status fairly or efficiently. And the early pilots of the scheme are very far from encouraging. The Prime Minister claimed that this is a good deal. And so confident was she of that, that she refused to publish the government's legal advice. But her government's own economic assessment clearly tells us it is a bad deal. It's a product, Mr. Speaker, of 2 years of botched negotiations, in which the government spent more time arguing with itself and in its own cabinet than it did in negotiating with the European Union. It's not only on Brexit that they have failed. Under this government, Mr. Speaker, more people are living in poverty, including... Mr. Speaker, I'm talking of the poverty of 500,000 more children who've been moved into poverty while this government's been in office. I'm also talking of those that have been forced into rough sleeping and homelessness, which has risen every year. Too many people are stuck in low-paid and insecure work. Too many people are struggling to make ends meet and falling deeper and deeper into personal debt on credit cards and loan sharks. Nothing in this Brexit deal and nothing on offer from this government will solve that. That is why Labour believes that a general election would be the best outcome for the country. If this deal is rejected tonight, we need, Mr. Speaker, to keep in mind that the vast majority of the people of this country don't think of themselves as Remainers or Leavers. Whether they voted Leave or Remain 2.5 years ago, they, all of them, are concerned about their future, and it's their concerns this House must be able to answer and meet. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that tonight this House votes down this deal, and then we move to a general election. So the people, Mr. Speaker, so the people...
Order. Nobody's going to shout the right honourable gentleman down, just as nobody will shout the Prime Minister down. All they're doing, by causing me to intervene, is taking time away. Not necessary, rather foolish, thoroughly counterproductive. Jeremy Corbyn.
So, Mr. Speaker, the people need to be able to take back control, and a general election would give them the opportunity to decide who their MPs were, who their government was, and who was negotiating on their behalf. And it would give that new government a mandate, and the mandate that is needed to break the deadlock that has been brought to this House by this government. But first, Mr. Speaker, I ask this of the House. Vote against this deal. Vote against this deal because we've had a very long and very detailed debate in this House. More members have spoken in this debate than almost any other debate I can remember. They've given a heartfelt analysis of this deal, and a very large number have said why they will vote against this deal. Quite simply, Mr. Speaker, this deal is bad for our economy, a bad deal for our democracy, and a bad deal for this country. I ask the House tonight to do the right thing. Reject this deal. Reject this deal because of the harm it would do, and show that we as MPs are speaking up for the people that we represent, who recognise this deal is dangerous for this country and bad for them, their living standards, and for our collective future.
Mr. Speaker, this debate has lasted some 8 days, over 54 hours, with speeches of powerful sincerity from over 200 honourable and right honourable members. It has been historic for our Parliament and for our country. We have heard contributions from every perspective, looking at all aspects of this complex and vital question. We've seen this House at its most passionate and vigorous, and I thank everyone who has contributed. No one watching this debate can be in any doubt about the strength of this House of Commons as the fulcrum of our democracy. This is a debate about our economy and security, the livelihoods of our constituents, and the future for our children and for generations to come. It goes to the heart of our Constitution, and no one should forget that it is a democratic process that has got us to where we are today. In 2015, my party stood on an election manifesto that had as a centrepiece the promise of an in-out referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union. The British people responded by electing a Conservative government to follow through on that promise. That is what we did when this House voted overwhelmingly to hold the referendum and put the choice in the hands of the British people. Indeed, 470 current members voted in favour of it, and only 32 opposed it. That campaign was keenly fought. It caught the public imagination like few campaigns before it. Turnout was 72%, higher than for any national poll for a quarter of a century. And while not overwhelming, the result was clear and it was decisive. Something this House accepted when we voted overwhelmingly to trigger Article 50. 436 current members voted to do so, only 85 opposed. Parliament gave the people a choice. We set the clock ticking on our departure. And tonight, we will determine whether we move forward with a withdrawal agreement that honours the vote and sets us on course for a better future. The responsibility of each and every one of us at this moment is profound, for this is an historic decision that will set the future of our country for generations. So what are the alternatives that present themselves? First, we could decide it's all too difficult and give up, either by revoking Article 50 or passing the back buck to the British people in a second referendum. But I believe we have a duty to deliver on the democratic decision of the British people, and to do so in a way that brings our country together. A second referendum would lead instead to further division. There'd be no agreement to the question, let alone the answer. It would say to the people we were elected to serve that we were unwilling to do what they had instructed. Now, the second possible outcome is that we leave on the 29th of March without a deal. But I don't believe that's what the British people voted for, because they were told that if they voted to leave, they could still expect a good trading relationship with the European Union. And neither would it be the best outcome. Our deal delivers certainty for businesses, with a time-limited implementation period to prepare for the new arrangements of the future relationship. No deal means no implementation period. Our deal protects the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU, so they can carry on their lives as before. No deal means no reciprocal agreement to protect those citizens' rights. Our deal delivers the deepest security partnership in the EU's history, so our police and security services can continue to work together with their European partners to keep all our people safe. No deal means no such security partnership. And our deal delivers the foundations for an unprecedented economic relationship with the EU that is more ambitious, that is...
I said earlier it was becoming really rather a noisy and unseemly atmosphere, and that has now resumed. It must stop. The Prime Minister must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Our deal delivers the foundations for an unprecedented economic relationship with the EU that is more ambitious than anything they have ever entered into with a third country. It will give us the benefits of trading with the European Union and the ability to forge new trade deals in our own right. No deal means those new trade deals come at the expense of a trade deal with Europe, not in addition to it. So while it is categorically wrong to suggest that our country could not ultimately make a success of no deal, it is equally wrong to suggest that this is the best outcome. Now, third, there is the path advocated by the Leader of the Opposition, and we've heard it again, of calling a general election. But today's vote is not about what's best for the Leader of the Opposition. It is about what is best for the country. And at the end of a general election, whatever the result, the choices facing us will not have changed. It will still be no Brexit, leaving with no deal, or leaving with a deal. And there's no guarantee that an election would make the parliamentary arithmetic any easier. All it would gain is 2 more months of uncertainty and division. In 2017, the two main parties both stood on manifestos that pledged to deliver the result of the referendum. They got over 80% of the vote. People had the opportunity to vote for a second referendum by supporting the Liberal Democrats in 2017. Just 7% of voters did so. It is the job of Parliament to deliver on the promises made at the last election, not to be seeking a new one. Now, some suggest there's a fourth option, to agree that we should leave with a deal on the 29th of March, but to vote this deal down in the hope of going back to Brussels again and negotiating an alternative deal. But no such alternative deal exists. The political declaration sets the framework for the future relationship, and the next phase of negotiations will be our chance to shape that relationship. But we cannot begin those talks unless or until we agree the terms of our withdrawal. And the European Union will not agree to any other deal for that withdrawal. So, having ruled out all of these options, we're left with one: to vote for this deal tonight. One that delivers on the core tenets of Brexit, taking back control of our borders, laws, money, trade and fisheries, but in a way that protects jobs, ensures our security and honours the integrity of our United Kingdom. One that strikes a fair balance between the hopes and desires of all our fellow citizens, those who voted to leave and those who voted to stay in. And if we leave with the deal I'm proposing, I believe we can lay the foundations from which to build a better Britain. And as Prime Minister, I would not stand at this dispatch box and recommend a course of action that I do not believe is in the best interests of our country and our future. And there are differences in this House today, but I believe we can come together as we go forwards. And let me reassure anyone who's in any doubt whatsoever, the Government will work harder at taking Parliament with us. And as we move on to the next phase of negotiations, we will be looking to work with Parliament to seek that consensus. But, Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the most contentious element of our deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol.
My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, knows that what concerns many of us is the possibility of the permanent nature of the Northern Ireland backstop. May I refer her to my Amendment B on the order paper, which sets a deadline for that backstop, and may I ask her what is the attitude of the Government to my amendment?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for the question he's asked and for the work that he has been doing to try to find a way through on this particular issue, and I know he's spent a long time consulting with international lawyers on this issue. The Government isn't able to accept the amendment that has been selected, that my right honourable friend has put down that has been selected tonight, because we have a different opinion and a different interpretation of the Vienna Convention. But I note that my right honourable friend has put down an alternative proposals in relation to this issue. The Government is willing to look at creative solutions and will be happy to carry on working with my right honourable friend in relation to that particular issue. I said I would turn to the Northern Ireland.
Order. The House must calm itself. Zen. Restraint. Patience. Hear the Prime Minister.
I set out the Government's position in detail on my statement in my statement yesterday, so I'm not going to go over it again. But the key thing to remember is this isn't a commitment we're making to the European Union. It's a commitment to the people of Northern Ireland and Ireland that they will be able to carry on living their lives as they do today. It's about saying that whatever happens when we leave the EU, we will honour the Belfast Agreement. Its success has been built on allowing people from both communities in Northern Ireland to feel that their identities are respected under the principle of consent. For many people in Northern Ireland, that means having a seamless land border between the UK and Ireland, which is also essential for their economy. For others, that means fully respecting the fact that Northern Ireland is an intrinsic part of the United Kingdom. No one wants to see the return of a hard border, And as a proud unionist, I share the concerns of members who are determined that we do not undermine the strength of our United Kingdom. But it is not enough simply to make these assertions. We have to put in place arrangements that deliver those ends. And it's not just as simple as some would like it to be. So, as Prime Minister for the whole UK, it's my duty to provide a solution that works for the people of Northern Ireland. The answer lies in agreeing our future economic relationship, but we need an insurance policy to guarantee there will be no hard border if that future relationship is not in place by the end of the implementation period. I'll give way to the Leader of the Democratic Union.
Very grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. And would she agree that whatever one's view on this withdrawal agreement, and whatever arguments the people deploy, that we should not be using the peace or the political process in Northern Ireland as arguments for voting for this deal or voting against it? Would she agree that that is completely and utterly out of order? Make that clear to all of our Cabinet colleagues as well.
To the right honourable gentleman, I think everybody across this House is committed to ensuring that we maintain the arrangements of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, that we also ensure that we maintain the many benefits that have come from the peace process in Northern Ireland. And that should not be disrupted, and that should not be affected in any sense. But I also say that whatever future relationship is going to be negotiated, or people want to see being negotiated, that insurance policy is essential. Any of the other proposals, Canada, Norway, any number of variations of those models, all of them require the insurance policy, and that is the so-called backstop. And no backstop simply means no deal now and for the foreseeable future. And I don't want to see anybody being able to exploit no deal and bringing doubt about the future of our union as a result of that. And let's remember, if I may say to this House, what the withdrawal agreement does deliver for the people of Northern Ireland. An implementation period, certainty for businesses. Protection of citizens' rights, certainty to thousands of families. No hard border, unfettered access to British and EU markets. Protection of the single electricity market across the island of Ireland, securing energy supply in Northern Ireland. Continued security cooperation with our European allies, that the police service of Northern Ireland say is essential, and above all, the protection of the historic Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The deal we have puts our union first. Now, let me turn to the contribution of the Leader of the Opposition. Characteristic of his whole approach to Brexit, long on criticism and short on coherence. He's claimed that he'll be able to renegotiate the deal in a matter of weeks, get a drastically different outcome, and despite the European Union making clear that's impossible. But everything he does is designed to avoid taking any difficult decisions, saying one thing to one group and another thing to another. In the general election, he said in his manifesto, freedom of movement will end. On Sunday, he said, I'm not against the free movement of people. When asked about Brexit in a German newspaper, he said, we can't stop it. The referendum took place. Article 50 has been triggered. In his speech at Wakefield last week, and again this evening, he said a second referendum was an option on the table. He says Labour would run an independent trade policy, but he wants to join the customs union. He says he's opposed to no deal, but he says he's opposed to withdrawal agreement and the backstop without which there is no deal. So the question is, what is his position? Because he has failed in his responsibility to provide a credible alternative to the government of the day by pursuing from the start a cynical course designed to serve his own political interest and not the national interest. He has forfeited the right to demand loyalty from those of his MPs who take a more pragmatic view, because he doesn't care whether we leave or not, with a deal or not, as long as he can maximise disruption and uncertainty and the likelihood of a general election. And I hope that members opposite, who faithfully pledged to their constituents that they would respect the result of the referendum, that they think carefully before voting against a deal which delivers Brexit. And I hope that those who fear leaving without a deal whose constituents rely on manufacturing jobs, think very carefully about rejecting a deal that is the only guaranteed way to take no deal off the table. Mr. Speaker, this is the most significant vote that any of us will ever be part of in our political careers. After all the debate, all the disagreement, all the division, the time has now come for all of us in this House to make a decision that will define our country for decades to come, a decision that will determine the future for our constituents, their children and their grandchildren, a decision that each of us will have to justify and live with for many years to come. We know the consequences of voting for this deal. They are laid out in black and white in the pages of the withdrawal agreement. But no one who votes against this deal will be able to tell their constituents what real-world outcome they voted for, because a vote against this deal is a vote for nothing more than uncertainty, division, and the very real risk of no deal.
I'm very grateful for the Prime Minister for giving way. Prime Minister, on any of the analysis of Brexit, economic growth will be lower than staying in the European Union. Will the Prime Minister not realise, on the basis of the knowledge and on the fact that people are going to lose opportunities as a consequence of Brexit, the alternative is to extend Article 50, go back, give the people the say. Let's act in all our interest on the basis of the information that we now have.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, Parliament gave the British people a choice. Parliament, the government of the time, all parties, all those campaigning in that referendum were absolutely clear that whatever the decision of that referendum, it would be respected by government and by Parliament. And I believe that we have a duty to deliver on that referendum vote, and to do so in a way that does protect people's jobs and protects our security and protects our union. A vote against this deal is a vote for nothing more than uncertainty, division, and the very real risk of no deal or no Brexit at all. And it doesn't have to be that way. Tonight we can choose certainty over uncertainty. We can choose unity over division. We can choose to deliver on our promise to the British people, not break that promise and endanger trust in politics for a generation. Because as members of Parliament, we have a duty to serve not our own self-interest nor that of our parties, but the people we were elected to represent. It is the people of this country that we were sent here to serve. The people of this country who queued up at polling stations, who cast their ballots so they might put their faith in us. It is the people of this country who entrusted us with the sacred right to build for them and their children and grandchildren the brighter future they expect and deserve. And if we act in the national interest and back this deal tonight, then tomorrow we can begin to build that future together. If we act in the national interest and back this deal tonight, we can build a country that works for everyone. Together we can show the people we serve that their voices have been heard, that their trust was not misplaced, that our politics can and does deliver, that politicians can rise above our differences and come together to do what the people asked of us. That is the test history has set for us today. It will determine the future of our country for generations. We each have a solemn responsibility to deliver Brexit and take this country forward. And with my whole heart, I call on this House to discharge that responsibility together, and I commend this motion to the House.
House of the 4th of December and the 9th of January, I must now put the questions necessary to dispose of proceedings on the European Union withdrawal motion. As I explained the sequence earlier, it should now be familiar to colleagues. I begin by inviting Jeremy Corbyn, the Leader of the Opposition, to move Amendment A.
Mr. Speaker.
Not moved. I turn now to the second of the amendments, that in the name of the Leader of the Scottish National Party, Mr Ian Blackford, Amendment K.
Not moved, Mr. Speaker.
Moved. Thank you. I turn to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Gainsborough, to move, if he so wishes, Amendment B.
In view of the positive response from the PM, not moved.
Moved. Very well. And finally, I invite Mr John Barron to move Amendment F.
I beg to move.
The question is that the amendment in the name of the honourable gentleman and of others, Amendment F, be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the noes have it. No? Is the honourable gentleman persisting? No? Persistence in order. I know what I'm doing. The key point is persistence. If the honourable order. If the honourable gentleman wishes to press his amendment, he is entitled to do so. Oh, yes, he is. Oh, yes, he is. I'll be the judge of that. The question is that the amendment be made. I'll say it once more. As many as other opinions say aye. Of the contrary, no. Clear the lobby. The question is that Amendment F, as in F for Freddie, be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Sir Mike Penning and Nigel Evans. Tellers for the noes, Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart. Lock the doors! Order.
The ayes to the right were 24. The noes to the left were 600.
The ayes to the right, 24. The noes to the left, 600. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Thank you.
One more heave.
Order. I now put the main question to the House. The main question in the name of the Prime Minister. The question is the main motion in the name of the Prime Minister. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye! Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! Division! Clear the lobby! Order. The question is the main motion in the name of the Prime Minister. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the noes, Vicky Foxcroft and Nick Smith.
Nulos poo. Nulos poo. Nulos poo. Nulos poo.
As a result, we are looking at the margin by which it is rejected to ascertain whether it would be viable for UK PMA to force a revote with some amendment terms perhaps. The logic is that if the vote is overwhelmingly rejected by, say, more than 200 votes, it weakens her hand in getting a new vote in Parliament.
Lock the doors!
Kaplan does see a quarter or two of patience. He says months, not weeks. Ahead of the results of this vote, Sky reports, citing sources, Juncker is coming back to Brussels this evening. Will make a statement after the Commons vote on PM Theresa May's Brexit deal. So we are expecting a statement from Juncker to come at some point this evening. Other reports, Harry Cole says it's not looking good for the government. All eyes seem to be back, nose still snaking out. Talk of May only able to muster 200. So again, word is the government has 202 votes. Would of course be a sizable defeat over here. We are seeing cable now dip under 127 as we see these tweets over here. So according to some journalists, word government has 202 votes, which would be a quite a big defeat. And more commentary here, according to Harry Cole, he suggests if May had 202, that would be 475 against, and that would be a strong steer. So it would be an overwhelming rejection, and it would question, and this is our commentary, not his, it would question her ability to schedule another vote on this, especially given the fact that it's quite unamended. Looks like Newswise carrying 432 vote against the deal, 202 back it. So again, I've not seen official confirmation. It's Newswise 202 vote for the deal, 432 back it, reject it. So 432 reject, 202 back. Would be quite a big rejection, and we are seeing a downside here in cable.
New Los Poo. New Los Poo. New Los Poo. New Los Poo.
The ayes to the right,
230 vote margin she loses by, according to
the
these
noes
reports.
to the left, 432.
The ayes to the right,
127 mark, but it has been facing for the last 12 hours.
The noes order. The ayes to the right, 202.
EU 27 regret the outcome of British Parliament rejection of the agreement, according to a spokesperson for Tusk.
The noes have it.
EU 27 urging the British government to clarify its intentions on its next steps ASAP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House has spoken, and the government will
tonight's
listen.
vote shows nothing about what
clear
Parliament
that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what
do
it
not know that
does
the House intends to honour the referendum decision.
Nothing
It may say
about
EU
how
citizens
or
in
even
UK deserve
if
clarity
it intends to
ASAP.
honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
UK PMA says we need to confirm whether the government has confidence of the House. UK PMA, we need to confirm whether the government has confidence of the House.
Must and will.
I believe my government has confidence of Parliament.
Those whose jobs rely on our trade with the EU need that clarity. So, with your permission, Mr. Speaker,
Table,
I'd like to
as
set
was
out
predicted
briefly
by the folks
how
at
the government
Economist,
intends to proceed.
Quite neutral in
First,
this
we
reaction.
need
We
to
did see knee
confirm
jerks
whether this
lower.
government still
However, we have
enjoys the
returned to
confidence
this
of the House.
127.15
I believe that
region,
it does,
where
but
we have
given
been
the
knocking
scale
around
and
for the last
importance
hour
of
and a
tonight's
bit, hour
vote,
and a bit.
it's right that others have the chance to test that question if they wish to do so. I can therefore confirm that if the official opposition table a confidence motion this evening in the form required by the
May
Fixed-Term
says
Parliament
if the House
Act,
confirms
the
its
government
confidence,
will make
she will
time to
hold
debate
meetings
that
with
motion
partners.
tomorrow. And if, as happened before Christmas, the official opposition
And May
declined to
says
do
government
so,
will
we
make
will,
time
on
tomorrow
this
for a
occasion,
confidence motion. So there's a
consider
confidence
making
motion in the
time
government
tomorrow
set to take
to
place
debate any
tomorrow.
motion in the form required from the other opposition parties, should they put one forward. Second, if the House confirms its confidence in this government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Third, if these meetings yield such ideas, the government will then explore them with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by offering two reassurances. The first is to those who fear that the government's strategy is to run down the clock to the 29th of March. That is not our strategy. I've always believed that the best way forward is to leave in an orderly way with a good deal and have devoted much of the last 2 years negotiating such a deal. As you confirmed, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the business motion tabled last week by my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield, is not legally binding, but the government respects the will of the House. We will therefore make a statement about the way forward and table an amendable motion by Monday. The second reassurance is to the British people who voted to leave the European Union in the referendum 2.5 years ago. I became Prime Minister immediately after that referendum. I believe it's my duty to deliver on their instruction, and I intend to do so. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the government to do just that.
I will come to other colleagues, but first of all, point of order, the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The result of tonight's vote is the greatest defeat for a government since the 1920s in this House. This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. I hear the words of the Prime Minister, but actions of her government of the past 2 years speak equally clearly. She is only attempting to reach out now to try to keep her failed process and deal alive after it's been so roundly rejected by Parliament on behalf of the people of this country. Labour has laid out our priorities consistently. No deal must be taken off the table A permanent customs union must be secured and people's rights and protections must be guaranteed so they do not fall behind. At every turn, the Prime Minister has closed the door on dialogue. Businesses begged her to negotiate a comprehensive customs union. Trade union leaders pressed her for the same thing. They were ignored. In the last 2 years, she's only had one priority, the Conservative Party. Her governing principle of delay and denial has reached the end of the line. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
First of all, just come to the lead. I will come to the right honourable gentleman, of course, but a point of order, the Leader of the House.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to make a short business statement regarding the business for tomorrow and the remainder of this week.
I'm extraordinarily grateful to the right honourable lady, and I accept that she can't be psychic as to what I'm thinking, and I can't be psychic as to what she's thinking. I think the smooth and orderly way to proceed with this matter is to deal with points of order first, and then to come to the right honourable lady's statement, which would be entirely proper and doubtless helpful to the House. Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, we should be aware of the situation that we're in. The clock is ticking. We have got very little time to resolve this. The fact that it has taken us so long to get to this point, frankly, is shameful. This is a humiliating defeat for the government. When I listen to the Prime Minister, it sounds like everybody else is at fault rather than her. She has to accept responsibility for what has happened this evening. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the Leader of the Opposition has come round to a motion of no confidence. This should have happened before, but of course we will support it. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, it is clear the clock is ticking. The government needs to secure the safety of all our nations and should immediately postpone the Article 50 process and should immediately have talks with all the leaders of the opposition parties. Let's work together in all our interests. But let's listen to the voices of the parliamentarians that have been sent here. There is no support for this deal. It mustn't come back again. The obvious thing to do, the right thing to do, suspend Article 50, put this to the people and a people's vote.
I know the right honourable gentleman won't take offence when I say he was using the device of a point of order, as is entirely understandable in these circumstances, to say what he wanted to say, but he was more interested in what he had to say to the House than in anything that I might have to say to him. It's not a matter for the Chair. The right honourable gentleman has registered his view, and these are the sorts of issues that can quite properly be aired in debate and quite conceivably in discussions that take place with the Prime Minister and other party leaders. But he's made his point with force and alacrity, and it's on the record for colleagues to study. I will take the honourable lady first, right honourable lady first, and then others. Point of order, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With this result of a scale that is unprecedented in recent times, it is clear that this deal, nor any tweaks to it, will get through the House of Commons. So can I ask for your guidance, Mr. Speaker, on how Parliament can assert its authority to make sure that we can give the people of this country a say on this deal to resolve this matter? It is a mess that needs to be resolved by the people in a people's vote.
Well, my response to the honourable lady is as follows. First of all, there may well be an opportunity for her to air her own thoughts on that matter, the situation we face and the suggested way forward in the course of debate to which the Prime Minister in her point of order referred. There is that prospect.
potentially unfolding. So that's one opportunity for the Honourable Lady. And the second would be those discussions to take place in coming days. And I dare say that the Honourable Lady will want to take the chance to participate in those. More widely, where there is discussion about Parliament's role and what Parliament might do and what options Parliament might have, I think I can predict with complete confidence that the Honourable Lady will have a view about that, and that view, which is important, will be heard. And point of order, Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister spoke about the will of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and I think we have to investigate that further. When can we test the will of this House on the choices that are now left? The choices are no deal versus revoking Article 50. Can we test these in the House? And bearing in mind, of course, that in Scotland the European Union is more popular in the polls than the United Kingdom, and the Prime Minister should know that.
There will be plenty of opportunity for testing in the days ahead. I think the... Well, can I just take the Honourable Lady first? Point of order, Dr Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This isn't a political point of order. Yesterday it was raised the issue of the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, and the fact that she should have been undergoing a caesarean section for a high-risk pregnancy, and she is comfortable with me saying she has gestational diabetes and was asked by her medical team to undergo that at an early possibility. She has had to defer that despite the advice and comments that you made from the chair yesterday that apparently were given no comfort from the government benches. And I think this is shocking. And I have to say that as a doctor, to put our colleague at risk and her baby at risk because we cannot have a method of allowing those who are sick or pregnant is disgraceful.
Well, I note what the Honourable Lady says, and I don't cavil at it at all. I made the point yesterday. I thought the situation was lamentable. I used that word, I think, several times. The situation was lamentable. This matter, I'm not interested in people chuntering from a sedentary position to no obvious benefit or purpose. I'm ruling on the matter and I require no assistance in the process of doing so. The situation was lamentable. I thought it better that the Honourable Lady should have the opportunity of a proxy vote. That was my view, and it was a view widely shared. The matter was debated in February of last year and in September. I had indicated my strong support. It would have been necessary for a resolution to be tabled by the Leader of the House for reasons which others can explain. It's not my job to do their explaining for them. That has not happened. I think it's regrettable, but it cannot be sorted tonight. Nevertheless, she's registered her concern. It's a concern and a sense, frankly, of very deep disappointment, to put it mildly, that I share, and it will doubtless be dealt with in days or weeks to come. And my very great sympathies go to the Honourable Lady, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, who, in my judgment, should not have been put in this position. Point of order, Yvette Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has now said that she will listen to voices from right across this House. She has obviously had 30 months in which to do that, and it has led to this defeat for the government tonight, which is the greatest for more than 100 years. We must all hope that she will indeed listen to voices from across the House, but we also all recognise that it will take time, and people and businesses and government organisations and institutions will now be worried that there are only just over 70 days left. The Prime Minister did not mention Article 50.
Order. People talk about respect in this House, but there's a Minister of the Crown shouting at the Right Honourable Member for Normanton. I say in the kindest way, he's normally a very genial fellow. Stop it. You're capable of much better than that. Yvette Cooper.
Given the scale of the challenge, with the clock now really ticking down, the Prime Minister did not mention what will happen to Article 50. Mr. Speaker, can you advise the House on what we might be able to do to urge the Prime Minister, for the sake of businesses and jobs and people across the country, to seek an immediate extension of Article 50 now, so that this can be sorted out?
Well, the answer is, in the first instance, these are matters that can be aired in debate tomorrow. I don't think it's right for me tonight to give a ruling on what the Right Honourable Lady or others should or shouldn't do. She will be aware of the presentation of bills bill that took place in the name of another member who I believe also has views on these matters. These will be, I'm sure, discussed in the days ahead, not merely in private meetings, but I feel certain on the floor of the House. And of one thing I am sure, that which members wish to debate and which they determine shall be subject to a vote will be debated and voted upon. That seems to me so blindingly obvious that no sensible person would disagree with the proposition. If MPs want to debate a matter and to vote on it, that opportunity will, I'm sure, unfold in the period ahead. I think if there are no further points of order, and I don't think we need any, it is right that we hear the supplementary business statement by the Leader of the House.
I'm extraordinarily grateful, Mr. Speaker. With permission,
be honest. I don't really mind whether she's grateful or not, but she's got the chance. The Leader of the House.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I should like to make a short business statement regarding the business for tomorrow and the remainder of this week. Wednesday, the 16th of January, the House will be asked to consider a motion of no confidence in Her Majesty's Government under Section 2(4) of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act of 2011 in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. Thursday, the 17th of January, debate on a motion on mental health first aid in the workplace, followed by general debate on children's social care in England. The subjects for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. I shall make a further business statement in the usual way on Thursday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Shadow Leader of the House, I remind the House that the supplementary business statement is subject to questioning, but its terms are comparatively narrow, and I implore members to recognise the implication and spirit of that fact. The Shadow Leader, Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Leader of the House for the statement and say that the opposition concur with it in the circumstances of the vote. We agree with the debate tomorrow.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pete Wishart.
Just wonder, Mr. Speaker, whether you can find any way to confirm that the whole day's business tomorrow will be given to the vote of no confidence. According to the legislation set out in the Fixed Term Parliament Act, there's only a requirement for an hour and a half. I'm looking to the Leader of the House just to confirm that the whole day will be available. The Chief Whip is shaking his head, so I am sufficiently persuaded that that's going to be the case. So he's nodding his head, rather, so I'm satisfied that that is the case, and the Leader of the House is just about to confirm that.
Yes, subject to the agreement of the House.
It would be useful to know the timings. I mean, ordinarily, the Chair is approached about these matters, which is the sensible way to deal with it. But we do need to know what the timing is, and I hope the Right Honourable Lady will either be able to advise now or to confer with colleagues later in the evening, so that there is clarity on that matter. And then we'll be all very satisfied. The Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that your office has the proposal for a business motion tomorrow that proposes that the debate takes place for the whole day until 7 p.m.
Grateful, thank you. Point of order, thank you very much indeed. Supplementary business motion, Wes Streeting.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't sure if we were taking questions on the business statement or points of order, but given the scale of the defeat, the government must surely have seen the inevitable coming. The issues for debate on Thursday are important, but every day wasted is another day closer to exit, particularly without a deal. Are we really debating two motions with no consequence on Thursday, rather than deciding how we're going to move forward on a crucial issue facing our country?
Well, the Leader can add to what she said by way of the supplementary business statement if she likes. That seemed to me, if the honourable gentleman would forgive me saying so, a kind of curious hybrid between an attempted point of order on the one hand and a question on the supplementary business motion on the other. And I'm not sure if he had to plump for one or the other, which it would be. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman is that these matters can be aired in debate tomorrow in the business question on Thursday and in subsequent days. So I completely understand that the honourable gentleman is seized of the importance of early progress, but that opportunity will unfold in days to come, and I think I can predict with confidence that he'll be in his place, ready to leap to his feet to share his point of view with the House. Yes, is it really going to be necessary? Yeah, Simon Orr.
Mr. Speaker, could you confirm that the timetable set out by my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, perfectly accords with the amended programme motion which the House voted upon last week, which I would guess that the honourable gentleman voted in favour of, which the Prime Minister would have 3 sitting days.
It wouldn't have been agreed if that weren't the case. I don't wish to be unkind to the honourable gentleman, but he's frankly not adding anything by that point of order, although I'm sure he perfectly well intended to do so, but no additional public service has been provided. If there are further questions to the Leader, I'm sure she'll be happy to take them within the confines of the supplementary business motion, but if not, I suggest to the House that we proceed to subsequent motions, namely, if memory serves me correctly, motion number 3 on energy conservation, the whip to move.
I beg to move.
Oh, well, I'm sure the House wants to hear about the energy conservation motion. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The division is deferred until tomorrow. Motion number 4 on exiting the European Union, brackets nuclear safeguards, close brackets, the whip to move, thank you. The question is as on the order paper in respect of motion 4. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 5 entitled Rating and Valuation.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 6, colleagues, on UK participation in the EU Agency for Criminal Justice Cooperation, brackets Eurojust, close brackets, post-adoption opt-in decision. The whip to move.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. Oh, the division is deferred until tomorrow. Thank you, colleagues. We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
I beg to move this House to now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Kevin Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this historic night, I'm sorry that members are leaving, would not be listening to the problems that my constituency are facing at Chess Street railway station. But I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, that I've secured this debate to highlight the problems my constituency in Chester Street and the surrounding areas who use the station are having. Tonight we've been consumed by the debate on Brexit, but it is, I think, Mr. Speaker, worth reminding ourselves that other issues are important to our constituents, and despite our very serious deliberations today, our constituents, many are just getting on with their lives. Now, Mr. Speaker, Chester Street Railway Station serves not only the town of Chester Street, but the surrounding villages and communities of North Durham. My constituency, as people may well know, borders the Tyneside conurbation. Now, over the years, traditional industries in Chester Street and large parts of my North Durham constituency have moved and closed, and the area now has become a commuter town for both North Tyneside, north of the Tyne, and also parts of Durham and Teesside. So, therefore, Mr. Speaker, good transport links are important to the economic viability of my constituency. In Durham County Council's new economic plan, the transport links for the north of the county are highlighted as an important part of that part of the County Durham's economic future. Now, the journey time to Newcastle from Chester Street and south to Durham is less than 10 minutes. So in many cases, in many ways, it's an attractive commuter option for people to live in my constituency and work either on Tyneside, down in Teesside or in Durham. And for many reasons, that's why people have located themselves in the Chester Street and the surrounding areas. The main rail service in the morning and in the evenings are provided by 3 operators, TransPennine Express, Northern and cross country. But since May of last year, the main problem has been reliability of services, particularly by TransPennine. Not only have trains been late, but on very often occasions they have been cancelled altogether. Now these are particularly difficult for people at the 2 main commuter times. First thing in the morning, when people are keen to get to work at 9 o'clock, and also get home in the evenings. And those commuters have often found themselves either late for work because the trains have been cancelled, or in the evenings stuck either in Newcastle or other stations further south with no ability to get home. In some cases, people not being able to get home until 7 o'clock and later in the evenings. Now, Mr. Speaker, because of the concern that many of my constituents have who rely on the Chester Street Railway Station for their main commute to work, I called a public meeting in November. And I think, Mr. Speaker, it is useful, I think, to just highlight some of the comments that were made, not only at that meeting, but in the numerous emails and correspondence I've received from concerned constituents. First one was, in summary, this week, Chester Street to Darlington commuter train has been cancelled 7 out of 10 times.
And
the service, another constituent said, the service continues to go from bad to worse, with morning services having been totally cancelled 3 out of 4 days in the last week. Another constituent, a working mother, said that she was finding it difficult to hold down a senior executive job in Newcastle as it became untenable for her to regularly miss pre-arranged pick-up times for her children from school because she was stuck in Newcastle Central Station following trains being cancelled in the evenings. Another constituent writes, the 8:24 commuter train from Chester Street to Durham has been cancelled yet again, late for work. Another said, how can the region be taken seriously if our trains aren't on time 50% of the time? Another said, while financial compensation does indeed help, it does not compensate for the trouble that working parents have caused to them by the delays in train and their childcare responsibilities. I've got other constituents who've raised the issue not only just about childcare, but those looking after elderly relatives that in the evenings find it very difficult to get home from Newcastle. So it would not be in a gym.
I thank you for giving way. He's always very generous, and I'm here to support him as I am with others when it comes to debates. I understand in my research that I did on the subject matter which the gentleman is referring to, that the idea for the trains is to take people away from cars and buses. But unfortunately, in this instance, with the incident, I think you referred to it earlier on, and that's the issue of not getting onto the trains whenever they come into the station. Does the honourable gentleman feel that one way of addressing the issue of overcrowding in trains is to produce a longer train, which we know from our history and usage over here in the mainland? And does he feel that's an option?
Well, it is, and I think the honourable gentleman does raise an interesting point, is that this should be a way of getting people out of their cars and off other forms of transport into Tyneside and down into Durham and Teesside. And I accept that one option would be to have longer trains, but if the trains aren't turned up in the first place, That is the problem. So, Mr Speaker, these delays and cancellations are causing real hardship to many of my constituents. I even had one constituent contact me a few weeks ago saying he turned down a promotion at work because he couldn't guarantee to his employer that he was actually going to get in on time. So, these are real-life situations that are causing a lot of hardship to my constituents. I certainly will.
I think my honourable friend and near neighbour is actually outlining quite clearly that the Northern Rail franchise is a failed franchise. The service that they're giving to the people of the North East, the North West and Yorkshire and Humberside is frankly disastrous. Everyone knows that it is, and yet they're allowed to get away with this nonsense and actually put constituents of my honourable friend and many others in jeopardy of losing their jobs because of a shoddy service.
Well, I don't disagree with my honourable friend, but this is an economic case because we are losing the ability of people to access the jobs that there are on both Tyneside and down into Teesside and into Durham. And the other point is, which I think is why a lot of constituents feel hopeless, is that what can government do about it? And I think he raised an interesting point about the franchise itself and how it is actually operating. And I think whatever, and I'll mention it later on, whatever we do about in terms of the franchise, it does actually need tightening up in terms of the penalties. The other issue facing my constituents, Mr Speaker, is the issue that when trains are cancelled, clearly the trains that do turn up are then overcrowded. Now, it is only a short distance, small distance commute, but we've had situations where people have been unable to get on later trains. I also had a constituent who was travelling further afield to York and had booked his journey some 3 months in advance and booked an actual seat, but suffering, and he did that because he was suffering from a bad back and travelling with a friend for a day out in York who was suffering from cancer and had to stand all the way from Chester Street to York, and that, I've got to say, cannot be acceptable. Now, in terms of the issues that have been affecting the regularity of services to Chester Street, yes, some are directly related to the timetable, and there has been quite rightly a lot of publicity around the issues in Manchester and Leeds. But what's happening is a lot of the congestion and issues there are having a knock-on effect further north, because the companies are then cancelling trains and ensuring that they may go to York but go no further north, and likewise cancelling them all together. And the chaos around the Manchester and Leeds area has been well publicised. But what I ask of the Minister, and I certainly ask of the operators, is the north is further north than Leeds and Manchester, and the community, the people that rely on this service in my constituency shouldn't be sacrificed for just making sure that they can get their times right in Manchester and Leeds. The other, I think, frustration on my constituents' part has been TransPennines' appalling way of dealing with customers. Certainly in the evenings when trains are cancelled in travelling south from Newcastle to Chesley Street, there's no information given to
so just note the coalition partner, DUP,
stranded
a
commuters.
spokesperson for the
No alternatives offered in terms
says
of
PMA cannot carry on with this deal.
other ways
May
of
should
getting
go back
home.
to the EU and then to come up
and
with
a situation
deal
whereby
which reflects a change on area where she
people are
lost.
just
We never
left
wanted a
to
change
make
of
their own
government.
way, make alternative
That's what
provision.
DUP
But when that's on a
spokesperson.
regular basis, and if you have got childcare responsibilities, or as I know one constituent in particular has got an elderly mother she has to care for, then that is not acceptable. Arriving home after 7 o'clock in the evening when you're expected to be there at 5:15, I don't think is very... And that lack of information, and I've raised this with TransPennine, but they again seem to be... There's even no staff, for example, at Newcastle to give information to or provide alternative alternative forms of transport, whether it be replacement buses or alternative train options. The other, I think, issue is around compensation. Now, clearly in terms of compensation, there is a compensation scheme, but again, Transpen are not good at advertising the fact that people are entitled to compensation. And I think as a one-off goodwill gesture, Transpen should offer all regular travellers a month's free travel, because people like to put up for this for far too long. And I'd be interested to know whether the Minister has any powers to intercede in making sure that Transpennine do pay a reasonable compensation to people. But I can kind of come back to the point raised by my honourable friend from Gateshead. Is the issue is about this franchise. It is clearly not working, and certainly I think Transpennine either need to up their game and start acting like a organisation which is caring about its customers, or this franchise should be taken off them. And it's certainly, if we are going for refranchising, it should be looked at in detail how appallingly they've operated it so far. Now, the situation of where Chester Street is located should be travelling by train should be an ideal opportunity for people to access jobs, as I say, around our region. But if you've got inconsistent service, then this is not going to endear people. And certainly in terms of attracting people to live in Chester Street, it's obviously not going to be a great selling point if people can't rely on what should be an easy commute. The other issue is, and I've raised this for many years now, is why later in the day the service goes to a 2-hourly service. And I think in any future franchise we should be looking at a more regular service, because I do think there is capacity here to grow the usage of Chester Street Station, and